They operated a hospital in Jerusalem to aid Christians making pilgrimages to the Holy Land. In March 1198, the Teutonic Knights were given the rank of an order of knights, which made them into a fighting order. Like the Templars, the Teutonic Knights lived a semi-monastic lifestyle, practicing initiation rites, and were ruled by a Grand Master. The Teutonic Knights permitted only Teutons, Germans, to become members. They also feuded a great deal with the Hospitallers and Templars. During the Crusades, when Brotherhood military organizations were valiantly leading Christian armies to fight the Muslims, other groups in the Brotherhood network were rallying Muslims to battle the Christians. Of the several Brotherhood branches promoting the cause of Islam, one is of particular interest to us, the sect of assassins. Muhammad died in 632 AD. A struggle immediately ensued over who was to become his successor. This caused the Islamic religion to break apart into compelling sects, each having its own ideas about who was to succeed Muhammad. One such Islamic faction was Shia, which adhered to a strong into-the-world tradition. Shiites believed in the millennium, a day of judgment followed by 1,000 years of peace and a spiritual salvation. Eventually, the Shia sect itself split apart. One faction to emerge from the Shia split was the Ismaili sect, which gave birth to the Assassins. The Ismailians broke away from the other Shiites in the 8th century. The Ismaili sect was a brotherhood secret society with a lodge system similar to Freemasonry and to other brotherhood organizations. The Ismaili Grand Lodge was situated in Cairo, where it practiced step-by-step initiations with all of the attendant symbols and mysteries. Led by a Grand Master, the Ismailians promulgated a very strong apocalyptic message, complete with the promise of a coming Messiah. One Ismaili Lodge member was a man named Hassan I. Sabah. Mr. Sabah's mystical conversion came about as a result of a severe and dangerous illness, during which he believed that God had purged him and given him a spiritual rebirth. In 1078, at the Grand Lodge in Cairo, Mr. Sabah asked the Ismaili Caliph for permission to spread the Ismaili gospel in Persia. The Caliph granted Mr. Sabah's request on the condition that Sabah agreed to support the Caliph's eldest son, Nizar, as the next Caliph. Sabah accepted the deal and named his new Ismaili branch the Nizaris, after the Caliph's son. It was not long, however, before Mr. Sabah's branch became known by its more famous name, the Assassins. The Assassins are usually referred to as a religious sect. They were more accurately a secret society. According to Masonic historian Albert Mackey, the Assassins adopted the organizational structure of the Ismailians. The Assassins practiced step-by-step initiations and possessed a secret mystical doctrine. Mr. Mackey adds that the Assassins appear to have practiced 3 of the very same fraternal degrees used in Freemasonry today: apprentice, fellow, and master. Right, well, that goes, yeah, well, of course, because that goes back to the Babylonian mystery religions, Mr. Bramley. The Assassins had a religious code similar to the Hospitaller and Teutonic Knights. Now, this goes way, way, way back. That idea of it's the Trinity. Again, it's Osiris, Isis, Horus. It's the Father, Son, the Holy Ghost. It's the Trinity. That goes back way, way, way back. It's almost always been there. So it didn't just appear out of nowhere. It's not just some sort of weird coincidence that the Assassins would have used that same thing. Because, again, if they were a Brotherhood organization, then that means that they would follow what the Brotherhood had always done. And the Brotherhood had always had that sort of that trinity of adept, student, and master, or apprentice, fellow, and master. And, of course, that's often depicted inside of Masonic lodges. In fact, there's up in Guthrie, Oklahoma, they have the largest Freemasonic cathedral in the world. And inside they have these 3 stained glass windows. I have pictures of them, actually, because I went up there. And they're priceless. The insurance company won't even insure them, and that's what they depict. They depict the apprentice, the fellow, and the master. Fascinating paintings done on stained glass. They're one of a kind. There's no other ones like them in the world, and they're absolutely priceless works of art. They're absolutely amazing, too. A distinguishing feature of the assassin organization was its use of drugs, primarily hashish. Yeah, this is... Now, this is what Michael Tessarian refers to as bong-smoking Shiva worshippers. Oh, man. I almost spit Fruit Loops all over the fucking computer screen the first time I heard his ass say that shit. That was so funny. He fucking cracks me up, man. He's too funny. Bong-smoking Shiva worshippers. That's fucking greatness. Primarily hashish for mystical and other purposes. In fact, the word assassin comes from the word hashishian, which means users of hashish. Well, obviously. Hi, I'm a hashishian. Are you a hashishian? All right. Well, I'm a hashishian, hot hashishian male. Seeks female hashishian to lay down by the fire and read occult manuscripts with. Yes. Hashishian. We got to bring that back. The assassins and several other brotherhood groups in history extol the virtues of mind-altering pharmaceuticals as a way to achieve mystical enlightenment. Well, these guys don't sound half bad. The assassins were also a fighting organization with an army. Grandmaster Sabah chose a fortress located high in the northern mountains of Iran for the headquarters of his new group. The assassin fortress was known as Alamut, which means eagle's teaching or the eagle's nest. The assassins became a formidable military and political power in the region and eventually controlled other fortresses in Persia and Syria. The assassins feuded with other Muslim organizations and fought against the Knights Templar and other Christian armies during the Crusades. To help win its feuds and wars, the assassins developed the deadly tool for which they became famous and feared, the tool of the lone assassin. Yeah, the lone motherfucking gunman, fool. Most people today are painfully aware of the phenomenon of the so-called lone assassin. This is usually a young man in his 20s or 30s who is driven by crazed delusions and who displays little or no concern for his or her own safety as he murders an important leader in broad daylight in public and in front of witnesses. The killing has tremendous shock value, and it can greatly affect the political direction of a nation. See, they've been doing this forever. Many people believe that so-called lone assassins are products of our modern age. It is quite amusing to read ponderous psychiatric tomes to that effect. In truth, the lone assassin has been a political institution for over 700 years, if not longer. And I got to give it up. Give it up. Come on, give it up. Give it up. Give it up for Bramley right there. That's good work. That's good work, because that's absolutely true. And oftentimes people, especially in conspiratorial or, Jim Mars didn't point that out in Crossfire. You know what I mean? I got to give him points on that. That's an excellent point. Excellent point. I'm glad he put that in there and said that the way that he did, because, how come other researchers, when they're talking about Kennedy and lone assassins and Patsies and Oswalds, how come they never bring that up? The lone assassin has been a political institution for over 700 years, if not longer. Amen to that. 700 years ago, however, no pretense was made that the lone assassins acted alone as is done today. Back then, the lone assassin was known to be an effective and terrifying tool of political and social control. It was a technique used by the assassin organization to win its wars, increase its political influence, destroy its enemies, and enlarge its coffers by extortion. How did the assassin sect get young men to commit the murders? It is not easy to make people kill each other, especially when the murderer is likely to be caught and slain himself. The assassin organization had an effective method for overcoming this natural resistance and programming young men to kill. One of the earliest people to describe the assassin programming technique was Marco Polo, the famous European traveler of the 13th century who wrote a best-selling book about his journeys. Although Mr. Polo was accused by a few people in his own time of fabricating stories, subsequent investigation has verified nearly everything he described in his famous book. According to Mr. Polo, a portion of the assassin fortress in Alamut had been converted into a beautiful secret garden fashioned after the paradise described in Muhammad's visions of heaven. The garden grew almost every imaginable type of fruit and was watered with streams of wine, milk, and honey. The palaces were beautifully ornamented and had a company of singers, dancers, and musicians. If certain young men in the region showed promise as potential murderers, they were drugged, usually with opium or hashish, probably both, and taken to the secret garden. They were pampered for a few days, and nothing was denied them, including women. They were then drugged again and returned to their homes. Well, that doesn't sound half bad. They give you a bunch of drugs. They take you over with a bunch of bitches. They give you more drugs, and they take you home. Well, great. Where do we sign up? Oh, by the way, it kind of sounds like what they did to the 9/11 hijackers, doesn't it? Really, seriously. I'm not even trying to be funny. I mean, think about it. I mean, they tell us that these guys were out, at titty clubs the night before. They're flying airplanes and they're just leaving Qurans laying around titty bars and shit. Maybe that's, Before you get 1,000 virgins, you must go to titty bar. And you must leave the Quran lying in the titty bar. Or no, otherwise Allah will not be happy with you. The young men believed that the assassin leaders had transported them to heaven and back. Eager to return, the young men would gladly follow instructions of their assassin leaders. The heaven-struck underlings were often told that a return to paradise lay in boldly assassinating a targeted enemy leader. The young assassin was instructed to wait in a public place and strike down the victim with a dagger as the victim passed by. Because the young assassins would often be killed on the spot or later be executed, they were made to believe that their death at the scene of the crime or by later execution will result in a return to the paradise they remembered. The notoriety of the assassins spread. It was rumored that some European kings were paying tribute to the assassins to avoid becoming targets, although the extent of the assassin activity in Europe is still debated today. Some historians assert that the assassins focused most of their deadly practices on the conflicts going on in the Middle East. The assassins became famous far and wide as a result, and all people who attempt the murder of a political leader have come to be known as assassins or users of hashish. Although most modern assassins have not been hashish users, many have shown evidence of considerable mental tampering, which will be discussed near the end of this book. By the end of the 13th century, the Mongols had overrun the Middle East and had destroyed major assassin strongholds. Interestingly, the Mongols were also inspired by mystical beliefs. The assassins managed to survive the onslaught, and they exist today. Modern assassin sects are reported to be peaceably settled in India, Iran, and Syria. Their titular head is Aga Khan, who is the spiritual leader of all Ismailians worldwide. The Ismailians were estimated to number at about 20 million people as of today. As of 1840, the Aga Khans had been operating out of India because of an unsuccessful rebellion in 1838 of Aga Khan I against the Persian Shah. When the rebellion failed, Britain offered sanctuary to the Aga Khan in India, which was then under British rule. Since then, the Aga Khans have been traveling in elite circles of Western society. Recent Aga Khans have received educations at Oxford, Harvard, and in Switzerland. The Aga Khans have also gained a place in the international banking community through their establishment of a central bank in Damascus, Lebanon. That is unbelievable stuff. Whew. That's who the fuck these guys are. You know, they are telling us that. I mean, I don't hear Jonesy talking about that. Folks, these assassins, let me tell you something. The bankers are assassins, folks. Okay? These people are offshore. They're offshore assassins, folks. Well, I don't know what to do. You're going to have to call Ted, and he's going to shit out a gold deal for you today. It's going to be brilliant. I'm telling you what. I mean, really, though, my goodness, that's kind of an important piece of information. My goodness. I mean, again, it just proves these custodial bastards are the ones that set up the banks, they set up the religions, they set up everything. Use all these proxies to do it. Set up little dummy corporations. It may be a coincidence that lone assassins arose as an important phenomenon in the United States just about the time that Aga Khan I was establishing a relationship with the British in the early 19th century. The first known lone assassin to strike a U.S. president did so in 1835. The intended victim was Andrew Jackson, who was, interestingly, a member of a Knights Templar organization in America. Since then, U.S. presidents have been the targets of lone assassins every 10 to 20 years. Many other Western leaders and public figures have also been victims, although I have seen no evidence that the assassin sect itself is behind modern lone assassin episodes. It is clear that their technique has been picked up and used by influential political sources within Brotherhood connections in the Western world, as I shall discuss more fully in a later chapter. As we have seen, the Crusade era witnessed the birth of institutions which still affect us today. To the list, we can add two famous Christian orders, the Franciscans and the Dominicans. The Franciscans adopted the cord at the lion's outfit and the bald spot used by ancient Egyptian Brotherhood priests at El Amarara. The Franciscans appeared to be quite humane. The Dominicans, on the other hand, were placed in charge of the most widely hated byproduct of the Crusades, the Catholic Inquisition. The medieval Inquisition has been universally condemned as one of the most oppressive human institutions ever developed. It was known for its tortures and zealous excesses. The Inquisition arose out of an effort by Pope Innocent II to stamp out a large heretical sect in the south of France known as the Albigensians. Innocent II had called for a special crusade in 1208 to enter France and wipe out the sect. A 5-year war which ensued devastated the region. 10 years later, a new pope, Gregory IV, continued the action, and he placed the Dominicans in charge of investigating the Albigensians. Gregory gave the Dominican order full legal power to name and condemn all surviving heretics. Out of this campaign grew the full inhuman machinery of the Catholic Inquisition, which sought to stamp out heresy of every type. The Inquisition generated a fearful climate of intellectual and spiritual oppression in Europe. You know, it just dawned on me. I bet William Bramley's a Freemason. It makes no difference. I mean, I'll still have him on either way. I don't think I'll ask him if he's a Freemason. But, man, I wouldn't change what I really wouldn't change what I think about him. I wonder if he is, though. Some of the stuff I'm reading, when I'm reading this, I'm going, man, because he's definitely not one of these, priest class Jesuit, typical conspiracy bozos. He's definitely not, because, man, the stuff that he's talking about in this is way off the plantation, getting into naming the stuff that, wow. And again, I think it's why a lot of this stuff has been relegated to this fringe, because, it really does sort of peel the onion back on who's really in control and how far it goes back, doesn't it? The Inquisition generated a fearful climate of intellectual and spiritual oppression in Europe for the next 600 years. Hearsay, innuendo, and honest intellectual disagreement led many decent people to the torture rack and also death by burning. The social scars are still visible today in the instinctive fear so many people have of expressing non-conforming ideas. The Inquisition helped breed a social reaction of violence to non-conforming ideas that the world has not yet fully escaped. It is clear that the Christian church has undergone many changes by the time the Crusades ended. The church was no longer the humanitarian, decentralized religion envisioned by Jesus. The new Catholic Church, headquartered in Rome, had succumbed to the reforms of the East Roman emperors. It was a religion Jesus would have deplored. Fortunately, after the demise of the Inquisition, the Catholic Church began to improve, and it has many good qualities today. Well, maybe I'll take back what I said about Bramley. Maybe he is a priest class post. I don't know. Oh, I don't know. Who knows? Well, we're going to have him on, and it should be a good show nonetheless. That's just a staggering statement. Maybe that's a joke. That's a staggering. This guy just went on a fucking 18-page tirade, just taking a knife and just gutting the Catholics, right up the middle. And then he puts the motherfucking cherry and nuts on top of it and says the Catholic Church began to improve and it has many good qualities today. That's gotta be a bit just blowing smoke, right? Seriously. He has good qualities today. Maybe I will ask him about that. Mr. Bramley, in your book, you said that Catholic Church has many good qualities. I'd like to know, what's like for you to name for us in my audience right now what those good qualities are, and I'd like to have a discussion about that. I think that's a pertinent question. How about you? Perhaps the most significant event of the Crusades does not involve the waging of war, the programming of assassins, or the creation of an inquisition. It entails the making of a peace. In the year 1228, German Emperor Frederick II led a crusade to Jerusalem. Frederick was not in good graces with the Pope at the time, and Frederick has been described as a strange, secular-minded, highly educated prince, a sworn enemy of the papacy on political grounds, who had acquired by marriage the title of what was left of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Frederick's fight with Pope Gregory had begun only 1 year before his trip to Jerusalem. The conflict between Frederick and Pope Gregory centered about the issue of centralized papal power. Frederick opposed it, and Gregory was striving to hasten it. This dispute caused Frederick to be put under sentence of excommunication, a sentence finally carried out in 1245. While under the sentence, but not yet excommunicated, the unrepentant Frederick journeyed to his kingdom in Jerusalem at the head of his own crusade. Despite a deep involvement with the Teutonic Knights, Frederick II proved on that trip that he could be a man of peace. Instead of prolonging war with the Muslims, Frederick negotiated a peace treaty. He apparently felt that it was in everyone's best interest to end the religious strife, and that is precisely what he did. Frederick accomplished this feat by negotiating with the reigning Muslim leader, Sultan Kamil. Within a year of starting his talks with the Sultan and without the approval of the Pope, Frederick concluded a treaty signed in 1229 that gave Jerusalem back to the Christians for 10 years, provided that the Christians did not arm themselves. The arrangement worked. Using negotiation and appeals to reason, Frederick had accomplished in one short trip what the popes had claimed they were trying to do for almost 130 years with warfare and blood. Under Frederick's treaty, Christians were free to inhabit Jerusalem and make pilgrimages there, and the Muslims were freed from the threat posed by the Christian armies. Many Christian and Muslim leaders were not at all happy with this agreement, however, for Frederick had set it up, leaving both parties indignant at so peaceful a settlement. When the truce finally ran out in 1239, the Holy War was resumed. We might legitimately ask, why was Frederick's treaty not extended or a similar one negotiated? What purpose was served by diving into 70 additional years of bloody warfare? The Christians wound up losing the Holy Land altogether. So often we hear that wars are a product of basic human nature, yet in one peace effort, we saw 130 years of raging conflict end through the effort of one man appealing to the reason and cooperation of another man, resulting in peace for the duration of the treaty. See, that is a clear-cut case. That's a perfect example of why they use divide and conquer, why they use phony left-right paradigm, why they use race, color, sexual orientation, whatever have you, to divide us. Because that situation described right there proves that human beings, mankind, left to our own devices, left untampered, left without a hierarchy, left without religion, control, any of this stuff, can come together and live together in peace. It proves that. It completely dispels that myth that as he stated here, that, you know, oh, we're just basically built to suffer. You know, like it says in the Matrix, you know, the first Matrix we built was a utopia, and the second one we built because we discovered that human beings love suffering. That's a falsehood. That's a lie. They want us to believe that. The power structure, the hierarchy, the priest class, the government, call them what you will. They are the ones that drive wedges between us. They are the ones that try to get us in holy wars and uprisings and revolutions and all. You understand? Revolutions don't happen with man killing man. That's not a revolution. Anybody that ever tries to tell you that a revolution is man killing man is working for these sons of bitches. They need us to kill each other so they don't have to do it. They need us divided. This is more proof, more than ever, that we need to come together as a people. We can exist. We can do it. The only thing standing in our way is them. And all we have to do is stand together as a people and say, look, we don't need you anymore. We're throwing you motherfuckers out. Get out of here. The people have taken over. It can be done. But they lie to us and tell us that no, no, no. We're all the problem. We need to kill each other. I mean, it's just no question. The whole idea now of who's really in charge of what we deem the New World Order or the planet or everything else, there's just no question. We have been ruled over by people who lied and said they were gods. And said they were gods only because they had advanced technology. And we are lining up to do the same thing all over again. Can't you see it? We already are in many ways. We see that the ability of people to have peace is as strong, if not stronger, than a desire for war. What then drove Muslims and Christians to slaughter one another over a trivial bit of dry real estate? One answer to this question may be found in what the Muslims and Christians thought they were ultimately fighting for: their spiritual knowledge, their spiritual salvation, and freedom. They believed that by fighting and perhaps even dying gloriously for their faith, they were guaranteed eternal salvation. History has clearly demonstrated that the drive for spiritual freedom is so strong that it can override any human drive, including the urge for physical self-preservation. At some point, people will sacrifice their own physical existences and even the physical survival of loved ones if they believe that the sacrifice will ensure their spiritual integrity or that it will bring about their spiritual salvation. When genuine spiritual knowledge is distorted, yet the desire for spiritual salvation continues to be stimulated, a great many people can be led into doing a great many stupid things. One important step to solving the problem of war, then, is to achieve a true understanding of the spirit and an actual way to its rehabilitation. When we look at the spiritual practices of the Christian Knights and the Muslim Ismailians, we discover that participation in warfare was often exalted as a spiritual quest. Warriors on both sides were inspired by corrupted brotherhood mysticisms, which taught that spiritual rewards could be earned by engaging in military endeavors against fellow human beings. This was the mythology of the spiritually noble war in which gallant soldiers were promised eternal salvation and a place in heaven for fighting a noble cause. Let me get a drink here. This mythology still remains vital today for recruiting people to participate in continued warfare. It twists the urge for spiritual freedom into an honoring of war. What is war, then, if not a noble quest? Analyzed down to its most basic components, warfare is nothing more than the act of causing solid objects to destructively collide with other solid objects. That might sometimes be fun, but there is not much spiritual benefit to be derived from constantly engaging in it. Although it is true that war has many elements of a game, the destructive nature of war causes it to be little more than a series of criminal acts, primarily arson, battery, and murder. This reveals something of great significance. War is the institutionalization of criminality. Let me say that for you one more again. War is the institutionalization of criminality. War can never bring about spiritual improvement because criminality is one of the main causes of mental and spiritual deterioration. Societies which exalt criminal actions as a noble quest will suffer a rapid deterioration in the mental and spiritual condition of their inhabitants. Yeah. America, are you listening? Let me give that one to you one more again. Societies which exalt criminal actions as a noble quest will suffer a rapid deterioration in the mental and spiritual condition of their inhabitants. My God, look at our fucking country since 9/11, since the war in Iraq, since Afghanistan. Look at the mental deterioration going on because of these phony fucking puppet leaders that believe they're on a crusade. I mean, Bush called it the crusade. It's going to take time for us to turn this from order into chaos. Chaos out of order, but we will. It's a crusade. Spiritual doctrines which exalt combat are doctrines which degrade the human race. It is not warfare in pursuit of a just cause a good thing. The biggest problem with using violent force to fight for a cause is that the rules of force operate on completely different principles than do the principles of right and wrong. The victorious use of violent force depends upon skills that have nothing to do with whether or not one's cause is a just one. The man who can draw his six-shooter the fastest is not necessarily the man with the best ideas. We, like our heroes, when they can outshoot or physically overpower the bad guys, and there is nothing wrong with their being able to do so, but not all of our heroes can. Those who have a legitimate cause should therefore be wary of the temptation to assert the rightness of their beliefs in the arena of violent force, since their cause may undeservedly lose. There are many effective methods to promote good causes and make them win, but those methods are seldom used in a world educated to use violence as the ultimate court of appeal. The Crusades and other religious conflicts have often been fueled by the issue of who is a true Messiah and who is not. Passions can run strong on this topic. It therefore behooves us at this time to discuss what a Messiah might or might not be. In chapter 16, Messiahs and Means. In a global civilization such as ours, where spiritual knowledge and freedom appear to have been tampered with, there would obviously be a place for someone to develop a useful and understandable body of knowledge about the Spirit and the Spirit's relationship to the universe. Because verifiable spiritual phenomena seem to be consistent from person to person from time to time, it is probable that all spiritual realities are rooted in consistent laws and axioms, just like astronomy or physics. If someone were to discover and methodically outline those laws and axioms, he or she would be doing a great service. Such discoveries could open up a whole new science. Would a person who did this be a Messiah? Promises of a Messiah have been put forth by a great many religions, both maverick and custodial. The word Messiah has had several teachings. From simply teacher to liberator, a Messiah could be anyone from a person who develops a successful science of the Spirit to someone who is actually able to spiritually liberate the human race. Throughout history, there have been thousands of people claiming to be a Messiah, or they have been given the label by others, even if they did not claim it themselves. Some messianic claims are usually based upon prophecies recorded earlier in history, such as the Buddhist Maitreya legend, the second coming prophecy of the book of Revelation, the apocalyptic teachings of Zoroaster, or the Hebrew prophecies. Many people look at all messianic claims with outright skepticism. Others become avid followers of a leader whom they believe to be the fulfillment of a religious prophecy. This raises the question, has there ever been or will there ever be a genuine Messiah? How would anybody identify such a person? Anyone who successfully develops a functional science of the Spirit would obviously have a legitimate claim to the title of Messiah in the teacher's sense. There is nothing mystical or apocalyptic about this. A person makes some discoveries and shares them. If this knowledge becomes widely known and results in widespread spiritual salvation, then we enter the realm of the liberator or the prophesied Messiah. How do we identify such a liberator when there exist so many different prophecies with so many different ways to interpret them? The answer is simple. The would-be liberator must succeed. That person must earn the title. It is not God-given. This is a terribly cold and uncompromising way of looking at it. It strips away the magic and mysticism normally associated with messianic prophecy. It forces any person who would claim the title of Messiah to actually bring about peace and spiritual salvation, because such a prophecy is not going to be fulfilled unless someone causes it to happen. This compels the would-be liberator to fully overcome the overwhelming obstacles which act against these universal goals. This is one of the most unbelievable tasks that any person could ever hope to undertake. He need only look at past liberators to appreciate the long, hard road that such a person must travel. To date, no one has succeeded, but it is certainly a challenge worthy of the best talents. When most people envision a Messiah, they see a person dressed in spotless white who thinks, speaks, and behaves balls. Okay. We got a technical issue here. So I'm reading this, and I go, this PDF I have is fucked up. Anybody out there got a decent PDF that has pages 168 through 172? Because the copy I'm reading here cuts off at page 168 and drops to page 173, and there's none of the rest of it, and this is not acceptable. So I'll sit here for a minute and look at the chat room. If anybody in the chat room can come in the chat room and put a copy of that has pages 168 to page 172 and it's in PDF format in the chat room, that would be great. That's balls. No bueno. And again, that happened, well, it happened in one of the chapters, but I found out from a listener it was just Bible verses or something, so it wasn't pertinent info. But this is like, 4 pages. So yours has missing pages too. Man, that's weird. It makes me feel like people are editing out certain chapters, and then those are the only ones that are available online. Yeah, that's weird. Anybody? Bueller? That can't be the whole chapter if it goes from page 168 to page 173. Because it goes 68, 69, and then it cuts off. And then the next chapter I have is chapter 17, page 173. So obviously that's not the end of the chapter, buddy. I think we have a winner here. Let me look. Scrolling down here, Apocalypse of John, we read that. Muhammad, we read that. Bear with me here, I'm scrolling through. Messiahs and means. Okay, there's 169. No, actually, nice try, but this is the same as mine. Yeah, it cuts off and goes right to page 173. Wow, that sucks. Huh. Okay, so 70, well, look, you don't understand, sir. It cuts off. I'm trying to tell you, there's more pages than I have here because the last page I have is page 69, and then the next page after that's 173. And the sentence says, when people envision such a Messiah, they see a person dressed in spotless white who thinks, speaks, and behaves, and then it cuts off, but that's not a complete sentence. So what I'm saying is, there's more to it than I have. Oh well, I guess there's nothing we can do about that. So I guess you're just going to have to buy a copy of William Bramley's book and read those other pages yourself. We'll continue on here. I guess there's nothing I can do. All right, Chapter 17, Flying Gods Over America. Here we go. By the time of the Crusades, major dramas had unfolded on the opposite side of the globe. Great civilizations had come and gone on the American continents. It is difficult to study the history of the ancient American civilizations because nearly all original records from those civilizations were destroyed centuries ago. As a result, historians are often confronted with disputes over the most basic facts, such as dates. For example, time estimates regarding the great Mayan civilization have placed it everywhere from 30,000 years ago to 12,000 years ago to only 700 years ago. For the purposes of this book, I will use the dates that are most commonly accepted by modern historians and archaeologists. Many archaeologists believe that the first important North American civilization was the Olmec Society of Mexico. It is estimated to have flourished from about 800 BC until 400 BC. Very little is known about the Olmecs except that they left behind impressive ruins which included a large pyramid. The existence of the pyramid is strong evidence that there was an interaction between the Old and the New worlds in the BC years. The Olmecs are believed to have given birth to the famous Mayan civilization which followed. The Mayan culture extended from Mexico to Central America and lasted from 300 until 900 AD. Like the Olmecs, the Mayans were fond of building pyramids. Surprisingly, some Mayan pyramids were given a limestone facing, like the earlier pyramids in Egypt. The Mayans also copied the Egyptians by mummifying bodies and by holding similar beliefs about a physical afterlife, according to historian Raymond Cartier. Other analogies with Egypt are discernible in the admirable art of the Mayans. Their mural paintings and frescoes and decorated vases show a race of men with strongly marked Semitic features. Engage in all sorts of activities: agriculture, fishing, building, politics, and religion. Egypt alone has depicted these activities with the same cruel appearance of truth, but the pottery of the Mayans recalls that of the Etruscans, an ancient civilization of Italy. Their bas-reliefs remind one of India, and the huge steep stairways of the pyramidal temples are like those in Angkor Wat in Cambodia. Unless they obtained their models from outside, their brains must have been so constructed that they adopted the same forms of artistic expression as all other great civilizations of Europe and Asia. Did civilization then spring from one particular geographical region and then spread gradually in every direction like a forest fire? Or did it appear spontaneously and separately in various parts of the world? Were some races the teachers and others the pupils, or were they all self-taught? Isolated seeds, or one parent stem giving off shoots in every direction. The coincidences are far too strong for the American civilizations to have arisen independently of the old world societies. Jungian theories of collective unconscious are hardly satisfactory. The striking similarities indicate that the American civilization was a part of a global society. Excuse me. Even if ancient American inhabitants were not aware of it, a similar situation exists today. In different cities around the world, we find modern skyscrapers that look remarkably alike no matter where on the globe they stand. From Singapore to Africa to the United States, it can be rather a surprise to see in a remote African nation a tall, glassy skyscraper that is virtually identical to a skyscraper in Chicago. The surrounding culture, however, may be radically different in each country, indicating that the skyscraper in Africa is not a product of the native African culture, but is the product of an independent global influence. A similar global influence clearly existed more than a millennium ago, as evidenced by the remarkable similarities between ancient Mayan and Egyptian cultures. That global influence appears to have been the custodial society, because as soon as we review ancient American writings, we encounter once again our custodial friends. Custodians were worshipped by ancient Americans as human-like gods who hailed from other worlds. As in the Eastern Hemisphere, custodians in America were eventually distinguished by a cloak of mythology. As in Egypt and Mesopotamia, custodial servants in America were the priests, who held considerable political power because of their special relationship to mankind's reported extraterrestrial masters. It is therefore not surprising to find evidence that the brotherhood existed in the ancient Americas. For example, the snake was an important religious symbol throughout the ancient Western Hemisphere. Several Freemasonic historians claim evidence of early Masonic rites in pre-Columbian societies. The brotherhood symbol of the swastika was also prominent, as Professor W. Norman Brown of the University of Pennsylvania points out on page 27 of his book, The Swastika, a study of the Nazi claims of its Aryan origin. A curious problem lies in the presence of the swastika in America before the time of Columbus. It is frequent in northern, central, and southern America and has many variant forms. The American civilizations had a similar history to that of the Old World. It was filled with wars, genocides, and calamities. Cities and religious centers in ancient America came and went. One thing that remained consistent was the building of pyramids. The Toltecs, a civilization which arose from the Mayan society, continued the pyramid building tradition and constructed the fabulous Pyramid of the Sun in Mexico. This pyramid is larger than that of the Great Pyramid of Egypt in sheer bulk and is crafted with the same stone-cutting precision that characterizes its Egyptian counterpart. When the Spaniards invaded America in the 16th century, they deliberately destroyed nearly everything they could of the ancient American culture except for the gold and precious metals which were shipped to Spain. At that time in history, the Inquisition was at the height, and Spain was its most zealous advocate. The ancient Americans were considered pagan, and so Christian missionaries engaged in an energetic campaign to destroy all records and artifacts related to the American religions. Unfortunately, those records included priceless history and science texts. The effect of this obliteration was much like the destruction of the Alexandrian Library by Christians earlier. It created a substantial blackout regarding some of mankind's ancient history. This has left a great many unanswered questions about the Mayans. For example, the Mayans built many fabulous religious centers and then abandoned them. Some historians believe that the abandonment was done suddenly and that its cause remains a mystery. Others conclude that it was done gradually by the Mayan society as the Mayan society decayed. The Mayans were also known to practice human sacrifice. Some historians believe that the sacrifices were an intelligent ritual. Others say the sacrifices amounted to full-scale genocide, claiming 50,000 lives per year. Where does the truth lie? On the Global Reality right here on the Global Reality Radio Network. I'm your host, Josh Reeves. Late night moonbat edition for you here. Now we're going to jump back into reading William Bramley's The Gods of Eden for you here tonight. And it's been a very interesting read. I'm sorry that we have the little blockage there with not getting to read the little bits, but you can go back and get a hard copy of that yourself and read it. But I don't know, it just makes you wonder. It makes you feel like people are editing that out, you know, certain things out of there. I'll have to ask Mr. Bram if he's aware of that when we have him on the 18th. But again, let's jump back into this now. One book has surfaced which purports to be a record of ancient Mayan beliefs. It is known as the Popol Vuh, the Council Book. The Popol Vuh is not a genuinely ancient work. It was first written in the 16th century by an unknown Mayan. It was later translated into Spanish by Father Francisco Jimenez of the Dominican Order. Jimenez's translation was first published in Vienna in 1857, and it is the earliest surviving version of the Popol Vuh. The Popol Vuh is said to be a collection of Mayan beliefs and legends as they had been passed down orally through the centuries. It is clear, however, that many Christian ideas were incorporated into the work, either by the original unknown Mayan author or by Father Jimenez, or both. It is also obvious that the Popol Vuh contains many tales of pure fiction mixed in with what is said to be the true story of the creation of man. Nevertheless, several segments of the Popol Vuh are worth considering because they repeat important religious and historical themes we have seen elsewhere, but with far greater sophistication than is found in Christian writings. Those themes are expressed by the Popol Vuh within the context of the multiple gods of the ancient Mayans. The Popol Vuh states that mankind had been created to be servants of the gods, and the gods are quoted as saying, "Let us make him, and who shall nourish and sustain us? What shall we do to be invoked in order to be remembered on earth? We have already tried with our first creations, our first creatures, but we could not make them praise and venerate us. So then let us try to make obedient, respectful beings who will nourish and sustain us." Sounds like somebody trying to make themselves God to me. I don't know about you. I don't know how you fucking slice it. According to the Popol Vuh, the gods had made creatures known as figures of wood before creating Homo sapiens. Said to look and talk like men, these odd creatures of wood existed and multiplied. They had daughters, they had sons. They were, however, inadequate servants for the gods. To explain why, the Popol Vuh expresses a sophisticated spiritual truth not found in Christianity, but which is found in earlier Mesopotamian writings. The figures of wood did not have souls. This relates to the Popol Vuh, and so they walked on all fours aimlessly. In other words, without souls or spiritual beings to animate the bodies, the gods found that they had created living creatures which could biologically reproduce, but which lacked the intelligence to have goals or direction. The gods destroyed their figures of wood. It's figures of wood in parentheses, figures of wood, and held lengthy meetings to determine the shape and composition of their next attempt. The gods finally produced creatures to which spiritual beings could be attached. That new and improved creature was Homo sapiens. Creating Homo sapiens did not end custodial headaches, however. According to the Popol Vuh, the first Homo sapiens were too intelligent and had too many abilities. The first Homo sapiens were endowed with intelligence. They saw, and instantly they could see far. They succeeded in seeing. They succeeded in knowing all that there is in the world. When they looked, instantly they saw all around them, and they contemplated in turn the arc of heaven and the round face of earth. But the Creator and the Maker did not hear this with pleasure. It is not well that our creatures, our works, say they know all, the large and the small, they said. Something had to be done. Humans, and by implication the spiritual beings that animate human bodies, needed to have their level of intelligence reduced. Mankind had to be made more stupid. Well, they succeeded in that. The Popol Vuh then tells in symbolism what custodians did to early Homo sapiens to reduce human intelligence and intellectual vision. Then the heart of heaven blew mist into their eyes, which clouded their sight as when a mirror is breathed upon. Their eyes were covered, and they could see only what was close, only that which was clear to them. In this way, the wisdom and all the knowledge of the four men were destroyed. The above passage echoes the biblical Adam and Eve story, in which revolving swords had been placed to block human access to important knowledge. It also suggests a custodial intention that human beings should never learn about the world beyond the obvious and superficial. Again, all of my 15 years of research points in that direction. That's exactly what they've done. That's what all of this is about. That's where the true enslavement is, not all this banker stuff and all the rest of that. Those are just extensions of that. But the fact that we are continually lied to and kept as children, kept in the dark, is where the true control factors come from. The Popol Vuh contains another element worth mentioning because it reflects the muddling of languages theme of the biblical Tower of Babel story. The Popol Vuh relates that various gods spoke different languages, with the ancient Mayan tribes were compelled to adopt whenever they fell under the new rule of a new god. Even in the New World, humans were broken into different linguistic groups by the custodial gods. By the time the Spaniards first landed in Americas in the late 15th century, the custodial gods were no longer directly visible in human affairs and had not been around so far for centuries. Although UFOs continued to be observed around the world, people no longer viewed them as vehicles of the gods. The custodial race assumed a low profile, which made it seem as though they had left Earth and gone back home. Unfortunately, they still remained, as the next and most perhaps ominous chapter reveals. And we're going to continue on here. Chapter 18, The Black Death. The centralization of papal power culminated under Pope Innocent IV, who held the papal reigns from 1243 until 1254. Pope Innocent attempted to turn the papacy into the world's highest political authority by proclaiming that the Pope was the vicar of the Creator to whom every human creature is subjected. It was under Innocent IV that the Inquisition was made an official institution of the Roman Catholic Church. Despite the oppression of the Inquisition, Europe in the 13th century was beginning to recover from the economic and social disruption caused by the Crusades. Signs of a European Renaissance were visible in the widening of intellectual and artistic horizons. Trade with other parts of the world did much to enrich European life. Europe was entering into an era in which chivalry, music, art, and spiritual values were playing greater roles. Hardly a century of this progress had passed, however, before a disastrous event abruptly brought to it a temporary halt. That event was the bubonic plague, also known as the Black Death. The Black Death began in Asia and soon spread to Europe, where it killed well over 25 million people, about one-third of Europe's total population. It did so in less than 4 years. Some historians put the casualty figure closer to 35 to 40 million people, or about half of all Europeans. The epidemic first spread through Europe between 1347 and 1350. The bubonic plague continued to strike Europe with decreasing fatality every 10 to 20 years in short-lived outbreaks all the way up until the 1700s. Although it is difficult to calculate the total number of deaths from that 400-year period, it is believed that over 100 million people may have died from the plague. My God, that's ancient eugenics right there. This eugenics stuff goes back all the way back to the custodial races, to the dawn of time, all the way back to the Sumerians, folks. See, this is why Alex Jones won't talk about the IAAEE, the International Association for the Advancement of Ethnology and Eugenics. This is why he won't talk about that group. Because they're based where? Edinburgh, Scotland, exactly where the Knights Templar fled after they were burned to the stake and the rest of that stuff. That's where they set up Freemasonry. That's also the true home of eugenics. But again, Jones and the Truthers won't talk about that because it connects directly to people like Roger Pearson, who then connects directly to Willis Carto, head of the Liberty Lobby, who Jim Tucker writes for, and that other clown that thinks the Jews run everything. I mean, it's a total spook op. And this goes back all the way to that. 2 types of plague are believed to have caused the Black Death. The first is the bubonic type, which was the most common. The bubonic form of plague is characterized by swellings of the lymph nodes. The swellings are called buboes. The buboes are accompanied by vomiting, fever, and death within several days if not treated. This form of the plague is not contagious between human beings. It requires an active carrier such as a flea. For this reason, many historians believe that flea-infested rodents caused the bubonic plague. Rodents are known to carry the disease even today. A number of records from between 1347 and the late 1600s speak of rodent infestations prior to several outbreaks of the Black Death, lending credence to the rodent theory. The second form of plague contributing to the Black Death is a highly contagious type known as pneumonic plague. It is marked by shivering, rapid breath, and the coughing up of blood. Body temperatures are high, and death normally follows 3 to 4 days after the disease has been contracted. The second type of plague is nearly always fatal and transmits best in cold weather and in poor ventilation. Some physicians today believe it was this second form, the pneumonic plague, which was responsible for most of the casualties of the Black Death because of the crowding and poor hygienic conditions that were then prevalent in Europe. We would normally shake our heads at this tragic period of human history and be thankful that modern medicine has developed cures for these dreaded diseases. However, troubling enigmas about the Black Death still linger. Many outbreaks occurred in summer during warm weather in uncrowded regions. Not all outbreaks of bubonic plague were preceded by rodent infestations. In fact, only a minority of cases seem to be related to an increase in the presence of vermin. The greatest puzzle about the Black Death is how it was able to strike isolated human populations which had no contact with earlier infected areas. The epidemics also tended to end abruptly. To solve these puzzles, a historian would normally look to records from the plague years to see what people were reporting. When he does so, he encounters stories so stunning and unbelievable that he is likely to reject them as the fantasies and superstitions of badly frightened minds. A great many people throughout Europe and other plague-stricken regions of the world were reporting that outbreaks of the plague were caused by foul-smelling mists. Those mists frequently appeared after unusually bright lights in the sky. The historian quickly discovers that mists and bright lights were reported far more frequently and in many more locations than were rodent infestations. The plague years were in fact a period of heavy UFO activity. What then were the mysterious mists? There is another very important way in which plague germs can be transmitted: through germ weapons. The United States and the Soviet Union today have stockpiles of biological weapons containing bubonic plague and other epidemic diseases. The germs are kept alive in canisters which spray the diseases into the air on thick, often visible artificial mists. Anyone breathing in the mist will inhale the disease. There are enough such germ weapons today to wipe out a good portion of humanity. Reports of identical disease-inducing mist from the plague years strongly suggest that the Black Death was caused by germ warfare. Let us take a look at the incredible report which leads to that conclusion. The first outbreak of the plague in Europe followed an unusual series of events. Between 1298 and 1314, 7 large comets were seen over Europe. One was of awe-inspiring blackness. 1 year before the first breakout of the epidemic in Europe, a column of fire was reported over the Pope's palace in Avignon, France. Earlier that year, a ball of fire was observed over Paris. It reportedly remained visible to observers for some time. To the people of Europe, these sightings were considered omens of the plague, which soon followed. It is true that some reported comets, and were probably just that, comets, but some may have also been small meteors or fireballs. Centuries ago, people were generally far more superstitious than they are today, and so natural meteors and similar prosaic phenomenon were often reported as precursors to later disasters, even though there was no real-life connection. Or was there? Dun, 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 dun. On the other hand, it is important to note that almost any unusual object in the sky was called a comet. A good example is found in a best-selling book published in 1557, A Chronicle of Prodigies Importunans by Conrad Lyskosthenes. On page 494 of the book, we read, a comet observed in the year 1479. A comet was seen in Arabia in the manner of a sharply pointed wooden beam. The accompanying illustration, which was based on eyewitness description, shows what clearly looks like the front half of a rocket ship among some clouds. The object appears to have many portholes. Today we would call the object a UFO, not a comet. This leads us to wonder how many other ancient comets were actually similar rocket-like objects. When we are confronted with an old report of a comet, we therefore generally do not really know what kind of a thing we are dealing with unless there is a fuller description. A report of a sudden increase in comets or of similar celestial phenomena may in fact mean an increase in UFO activity. The link between unusual aerial phenomenon and the Black Death was established immediately during the first outbreaks of the plague in Asia, as one historian tells us. The first reports of the plague came out of the East. They were confused, exaggerated, frightening, as reports from that quarter of the world so often are. Descriptions of storms and earthquakes, of meteors and comets trailing noxious gases that killed trees and destroyed the fertility of the land. The above passage indicates that strange flying objects were doing more than just spreading disease. They were also apparently spraying chemical or biological defoliants from the air. The above passage echoes the ancient Mesopotamian tablets, which describe defoliation of the landscape by ancient custodial gods. My God, they were spraying chemtrails back then. I've said it once, I've said it again. I mean, how much more proof do you need? They've been spraying us with shit for centuries. I mean, this explains why. I mean, there are some times when you are zooming in on a camera on a chemtrail plane, the plane just disappears, folks. People have speculated for years this is some sort of extraterrestrial program. It may very well be. Many human casualties from the Black Death may have been also caused by such defoliants. The connection between aerial phenomenon and plague had begun centuries before the Black Death. We saw examples in our earlier discussion of Justinian's plague. We read from another source about a large plague that had reportedly broken out in the year 1117, almost 250 years before the Black Death. That plague was also preceded by an unusual celestial phenomenon. In 1117, in January, a comet passed like a fiery army over the north towards the Orient. The moon was overcast, blood red in an eclipse. A year later, a light appeared more brilliant than the sun. This was followed by a great cold, famine, and plague, of which 1/3 of humanity is said to have perished. Once the medieval Black Death got started, noteworthy aerial phenomena continued to accompany the dread epidemic. Reports of many of these phenomena were assembled by Johannes Knoll and published in his book, The Black Death, a Chronicle of the Plague. In the year 1606, a comet was seen, after which a general plague traversed the world. In 1582, a comet brought so violent a plague upon Mayo, Prague, Thuringia, the Netherlands, and other places that in Thuringia it carried off 37,000, and in the Netherlands 46,415 carried off. As if it swooped down and took them up in a craft. That's a very strange description. From Vienna, Austria, we get the following description of an event that happened in 1568. Here we see a connection between an outbreak of plague and an object described in a manner remarkably similar to a modern cigar or beam-shaped UFO. Sightings of unusual aerial aircraft phenomenon usually occurred from several minutes to a year before an outbreak of the plague. Where there was a gap between such a sighting and the arrival of the plague, a second phenomenon was sometimes reported: the appearance of frightening human-like figures dressed in black. These figures were often seen on the outskirts of a town or a village, and their presence would signal the outbreak of an epidemic almost immediately. A summary written in 1682 tells of one such a visit a century earlier. In Brandenburg, in Germany, there appeared in 1559 horrible men, of whom at first 15 and later on 12 were seen. The foremost had beside their posteriors little heads, the others fearful faces and long scythes with which they had cut at the oats so that the swish would be heard at a great distance. But the oats remained standing. When a quantity of people came running out to see them, they went on with their mowing. The visit of the strange men to the oat fields was followed immediately by a severe outbreak of the plague in Brandenburg. This incident raises intriguing questions. Who were the mysterious figures? What were the long scythe-like instruments that they held that emitted a loud swooshing sound? It appears that the scythes may have been long instruments designed to spray poison or germ-laden gas. This would mean that the townspeople misinterpreted the movement of the scythes as an attempt to cut oats, when in fact the movements were the act of spraying aerosols in the town. Similar men dressed in black were reported in Hungary. In the year of Christ, 1571, was seen at Kremitz in the mountain towns of Hungary on Ascension Day in the evening, to the great perturbation of all, when on the Schlusselenberg there appeared so many black riders that the opinion was prevalent that the Turks were making a secret raid, but who rapidly disappeared again, and thereupon a raging plague broke out in the neighborhood. Strange men dressed in black, demons, and other terrifying figures were obscured in the European communities. The frightening creatures were often observed carrying long brooms, scythes, or swords, and they were used to sweep or knock at the doors of people's homes. The inhabitants of these homes fell ill with the plague afterwards. It is from these reports that people created the popular image of death as a skeleton or demon carrying a scythe. Yeah, the Grim Reaper, that's where that comes from. The scythe came to symbolize the act of death, mowing down people like stalks of grain. In looking at this haunting image of death, we may in fact be staring into the face of a UFO. The chapter we're going to be starting on tonight, chapter 19, Luther and the Rose, from William Bramley's The Gods of Eden. The last chapter was kind of, I don't know, I'm just ready to move on. The Black Death stuff, blah, 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 whatever. It's just not really that interesting to me. Although, we should all be aware that depopulation and eugenics and all that stuff has been around for centuries. It's been around for a very long time, and it originates back with these custodial masters. And this is definitely why you see the people involved in eugenics happen to be tied in, of course, to people like, Roger Pearson and Willis Carto and the whole eugenics set that came out of Edinburgh, Scotland, which the self-proclaimed king of eugenics, Alex Jones, never seems to mention the IAAEE there. Very important piece of the eugenics puzzle. And often one that just gets glazed over, So here we go. Chapter 19, Luther and the Rose. In the 14th century, that region of Europe we know today as Germany consisted of numerous independent principalities and city-states. By that time, several of those principalities had emerged as the primary centers of Brotherhood activity in Europe. With most of that activity concentrated in the central German state of Hesse, in Germany and elsewhere, the Brotherhood and some of its most advanced initiates had become known by the Latin name, the Illuminati, which means the illuminated or the enlightened ones. One of the Illuminati's most important branches in Germany was the mystical Rosicrucian organization. Rosicrucianism was first introduced in Germany by the Emperor Charlemagne in the early 9th century A.D. Germany's first official Rosicrucian lodge was established in the city of Worms in the German state of Hesse in the year 1100 A.D. Rosicrucians achieved fame for their dedication to alchemy, their complex mystical symbols, and their secret degrees of initiation. The links between the Illuminati and early Rosicrucians were quite intimate in that advancement through the Rosicrucian degrees often resulted in admittance to the Illuminati. A number of Rosicrucian histories mistakenly state that the Rosicrucians did not begin their existence until the year 1614, the year in which German Rosicrucians published a dramatic pamphlet in Hesse announcing their presence and inviting people to join them. One reason this mistake is so commonly made and why the Rosicrucian order has been difficult to trace as one consecutive existence is a policy the order adopted of engaging in 108-year cycles of activity and inactivity. And that's very key. Yeah, they go off and on. According to the regulation, each major branch of the Rosicrucian order was required to establish an official date of its founding. From that date, each branch was to then compute successive 108-year periods. The first period would be a time of well-publicized outward activity during which the branch's existence would be made widely known to the public, and the branch would openly recruit new members. The next period was to consist of concealed silent activity in which there was to be no publicity and no one outside of the members' immediate families would be admitted to membership. Each Rosicrucian branch would then alternate between these two phases every 108 years. As Rosicrucian bodies switched back and forth between their outward and hidden phases, it seemed to observers that Rosicrucian orders were appearing and disappearing in history. According to Dr. Lewis of Amorc, AMORC, which is the American Rosicrucian Order, just why this new regulation was brought into effect is not known. The Illuminati and the Rosicrucians were major powers behind a new wave of religious movements during the Plague Years. One of the earliest of those movements was a mystical religion known as the Friends of God. The Friends of God appeared in Germany in the same year that the Black Death first struck Europe. The Friends organization was founded by a banker named Rulman Merswin, who had begun his financial career early in life and had made a sizable fortune from it. According to Merswin, in the year 1347, he was approached by a stranger claiming to be a friend of God. The identity of the mysterious stranger was never revealed. He must have been a Jew. I'm joking. I'm a friend of God, right? Only the Jews know God, right? Because it's, monotheism, Akhenaten, right? The identity of the mysterious stranger was never revealed by Merswin, leading to the suspicion that Merswin had merely invented him. It appears, however, that Merswin's friend was quite real and quite influential, as evidenced by the sudden change in Merswin and by the considerable support that the Friends movement was able to get so quickly. During one of the earliest encounters, Merswin's mysterious friend stated that he had had many mystical revelations directly from God, and that Merswin had been chosen to disseminate those revelations to the rest of the world. Merswin was deeply impressed. After that meeting, Merswin gave up his banking business, took leave of the world, and devoted himself and his personal fortune to spreading the new religion which the mysterious stranger was bringing him. As it turns out, what the stranger caused Merswin to create was another branch of the Brotherhood Network. The teachings of the Friends were deeply mystical and were divulged through a system of secret degrees and initiations. History records that records, let me start that over. It's supposed to be records, not records. History records that illuminated mystics and other Illuminati were among Merswin's principal backers. The teaching of the Friends of God were not only mystical, they were also heavily apocalyptic. The Friends preached a powerful end-of-the-world message to gain converts. Merswin claimed to be the recipient of many supernatural revelations in which he was told that God had grown disgusted with the Pope and the Catholic Church. God was now placing his faith in people like Merswin to carry out his sacred plans. According to Merswin, God was planning to severely punish humanity in the near future because of mankind's increased corruption and sin. Merswin had the sacred duty of preaching the need for everyone to therefore become completely obedient to God. Merswin was not alone in spreading this dire message. Similar prophets also found their way into the Friends movement bearing identical warnings. They all emphasized the need to unwaveringly obey God on the eve of the world's destruction. Merswin and his fellow doomsayers were certainly correct about one thing. The world was just about to undergo a cataclysm. The Black Death was just getting started. The Friends of God attracted a large following in Europe. Adherents were taught a 9-step program to become utterly and unquestioningly obedient to God. They were made to believe that this regimen would save them from the plague and the resulting social devastation occurring around them. And the first step of the program was a sincere confessional to restore health. A properly done confessional can have a highly beneficial effect on an individual, although a poorly done or unnecessary confessional can be damaging. The second step was a resolution by adherents to give up their own will and to submit to an illuminated friend of God who shall be their guide and counselor in the place of God. By the 7th step, a member had completely given up all self-will and had burned all bridges to become completely subservient to the Lord. By the final step, all personal desire was to be destroyed. The individual was to be crucified to the world and the world to them, enjoying only what God does and to wish for nothing else. These teachings were a program to make human beings obedient to an ultimate degree. Members were taught that obedience was a spiritual being's highest calling and something to be striven for as a quest. Merswin's conversion to this mysterious friend's religion was very damaging to him, as it no doubt was to many others. Merswin soon began to suffer strong manic-depressive symptoms, the phenomenon of alternately being in a happy state and then inexplicably experiencing mental depression and back and forth. And, I got to say, man, it's been my experience, and you make of this what you will. I can only, again, the things that are true to me, the truest to me, are the things that I've experienced and seen firsthand. And it's probably this way with everybody, but I'll say this, man, that statement right there about Mersenne beginning to suffer strong manic depressive symptoms, the phenomenon of alternately being in a happy state and inexplicably experiencing mental depression back and forth. I got to tell you, it's been my experience in my life that the people who I have known who have been the most, and some people just don't know they're brainwashed by a religion or brainwashed by Christianity, but I would say that I can't think of one single person I've ever known in my life that called themselves a Christian or a member of this religion or that religion that wasn't manic depressive. Seriously, it just breeds that. Because these religions and the way they're being presented to us are detrimental to our minds and our brains and the way we are. That's why they're implanted on us. That's why, like many people like myself at a very young age, just felt an instinctive knee-jerk reaction away from these things. I'm blown away by that. I don't know how. I just can't tell you. How did I know, folks? How did I know when I would see, or I would go to church and I would see church people and stuff? A few times I went to church. My parents didn't make me go to church. My parents didn't go to church on a regular basis, but, sometimes you'd have to go with, the neighbors, or you'd have to go with, your friend's family, or you'd have to go with, your cousins or whatever have you, And at a very young, early age, I just knew it was bullshit. I just knew it. I didn't want anything to do with it. At a very early age, I knew it. I don't know. I don't know how I knew that. I don't know how I was so dead on at 7. What kid at 7 years old knows, may even been earlier than that. Shit, first grade? I can remember the first time I went to church with a neighbor friend in first grade, and, they gave me where they save your soul and all that stuff. I'm like, it was just weird. And I was always instinctively just knee-jerkish away from religions at a very early age. But I got to tell you, every person I've ever known that has been called themselves a Christian or this, that, and the other has been a manic depressive. It's just unbelievable, the statistics on that. Probably many of you have experienced that as well. In Mersenne, these symptoms became severe, and they were erroneously perceived by his followers as a sign of religious transformation. Many people today would recognize such symptoms as an indication that Mersenne was connected to a repressive influence. In this case, the corrupted brotherhood and probably his mysterious friend. During his life in the Friends movement, Mersenne continued to claim many mystical experiences, including joint revelations with his friend. In one of those revelations, Mersenne was told to use his money to buy an island in Strasbourg for use as a friend's retreat. Oh, that must have been great, dude, Oh, my friend, my imaginary friend over here who told me to start this religion also told me I must buy an island, and all of you must go with me, and our religion must pay for it, yes. I mean, my God. That's greatness. Strasbourg was Mersenne's home city and is located by the southwestern French-German border. 5 years later, Mersenne had another joint revelation in which he was told to turn the whole Friends operation over to an organization called the Order of St. John, which governed the Friends movement afterwards. So he was told by this entity to turn it over to the Order of St. John, which we know as the Order of St. John of Jerusalem, correct? The Knights of Malta, right? Yes, my friend told me to now turn it over to the priest class. Here you go. That's what's always happened. They pose as, God, a God or the God. They always tend to say that they're the only one. Yeah, put no other gods before me. Well, okay. I thought there could only be one God, so how can we put another one before you if there are other than that, it's an indicator there's more than one, right? And they always come down and they use their hocus pocus and their smoke and their fucking pyrotechnics, and it looks like a Kiss show, and Ace Frehley shooting fucking rockets out of the end of his Les Paul, and these fucking twits are like, oh yeah, this is God, this is They don't know any better. And then, boom, they get a person, a man, to create a religion from a divine experience with God. And then in the end, they absorb it back into their power structure. It's genius. They've done this endlessly through time. And anyone who doesn't see that is just flat trying to ignore it intentionally because they don't want to know it. Because it undoes all the bullshit of their programming through their religion and everything else their whole lives. Wake up. It's not too late to get a clue. Clues are still going real cheap right now. I mean, we got a special going on right now here at the Global Reality. 2-for-1 clues. You can get 2 clues for the price of 1. Real cheap. Real cheap. Folks, it's cheaper than the cost of a cup of coffee, folks. You get a membership, folks. It's cheaper than the cost of a cup of coffee a day, folks. That's all it is. You can get a clue, folks. Just like me, I got a clue. I got a clue that I got my hand up Charlie Sheen's ass. Yeah, it's great. I've seen his hernia, folks. You know that, though. Seriously, it's not too late for you to get a clue if you still want to get one. The Friends of God religion was one of many mystical movements that proliferated during the plague years. These movements were usually Christian in nature, but they advertised themselves as an alternative to the Catholic Church and attracted many disgruntled Catholics on that basis. This began to split apart the Christian world. Unfortunately, the split did not mean that the Christians were returning to Jesus' maverick teachings. The new mystical religions only strengthened the emphasis on obedience and apocalypticism. This began to drive many people out of religion altogether and helped lay the foundation for the radical materialism which began to arise out of Germany shortly thereafter. The Friends of God and other mystical practices of the time became a juggernaut, which brought about one of the greatest challenges ever faced by the Catholic Church, the Protestant Reformation of Martin Luther. Luther began his famous ecclesiastical rebellion in the early 1500s. By that time, the Catholic Church had fallen into the hands of Pope Leo X, the son of Lorenzo de Medici. Lorenzo de Medici was the head of a wealthy international banking house in Florence, Italy. The Medici family had become involved with the papacy a generation earlier when the Medicis financed an archbishop who later became the schismatic anti-pope. The Medicis were awarded the task of collecting taxes and tithes that were due to this pope. The Medicis operated a far-flung network of collectors and sub-collectors to accomplish this undertaking. The fees earned from this operation helped the Medici family make the Medici family one of the wealthiest and most influential banking houses in Europe. The involvement of profit-motivated bankers in church affairs transformed many spiritual activities of the Catholic Church into a business enterprise. Uh-oh. Red alert, folks, red alert. Yeah, red alert indeed. They're getting into some of that. See, now we're getting into some of that territory that Jones won't touch. Yeah. Oh, he's shitting himself now. You better get some toilet paper. No, see, yeah, here we go. Because this is key, man. This is key. These fucking banksters who Jones tells you, they're at the tip of the spear, folks. They're at the top of the pyramid. Bankers, folks, all there is to it. Bilderbergers, bankers, eugenicists, they're all the same thing. That's real slick, but unfortunately for you, there are some of us out here who actually have done our own research. So here's the key thing here. It is 100% beyond any shadow of a doubt that the church and the bankers are hand in glove. And you can't talk about one without talking about the other. That is a fact. Fact, not debatable. You cannot talk about the bankers without talking about the priest class. You cannot talk about the bankers without talking about the church. And this, to me, is one of the key smoking guns that just nails yet another one of the million coffins in the coffin of Alex Jones, is the fact that he doesn't mention or tell you how intimately connected the Catholic order, the Jesuit order is, and everything else with the banking system. So let me read that for you again. The involvement of profit-motivated bankers in church affairs transformed many spiritual activities of the Catholic Church into a business enterprise. And Mr. Jones, you are part of that business enterprise, and you know it. You know it, I know it, everybody knows it now. Everybody knows it. That's great. You know who his core audience is now? 15, 16, 17-year-old kids. I'm not kidding. I got friends that are teachers and stuff, and they tell me about seeing, 16-year-old high school kids. That's really his demographic now. Which is super duper. You're young and stupid and really easily influenced at that age anyway, So he can have them. He can have them. I don't want fucking 15, 16-year-olds listening to my show anyway. I get messages from people all the time, oh, I want to play your show in my house, and I want to play it in my house when I got grandkids around, but I can't because you cuss all the time. Well, that's a moral faux pas on your part, not mine. You know what I mean? Just because your morals don't allow you to play something like around, certain people, that's not my bad. It shouldn't make me have to shift what I do, because you feel you have a moral objection to this. I don't claim to be a family show. I never have. Family show, folks. Family show. It's a family show here, folks. Now we don't allow you to cuss on this show. It's family show. Family show. Every time somebody cusses on John's show, it's family show. Family show. God damn it, it's a family show. Give me an enchilada, fuck. Yeah, I don't claim to be a family show. This is a show for the people. It's a show for people who want it real. No nonsense, no bullshit, no spin, straight up, fucking shaken, not stirred. You know what I mean? And that's what it is. And if that limits my reach, these recordings will be around for a lot longer than I am. And, maybe once they're of age, you can turn them on to my work. But, I'm just not going to censor myself or anything else. But, it's unbelievable to me, this campaign to not show the Catholic order and the Jesuits and all this stuff as being hand in glove in the power structure with the bankers. I mean, this is a very cold and calculated and well laid out operation that Jones and the rest of the phony truth movement, patriot movement are engaging in. It's unbelievable. This is a full-blown op. For example, Catholics believe in the importance of paying indulgences. An indulgence is a money paid to compensate for sin. When paid in conjunction with a properly done confessional, monetary penance can often be effective in relieving. Monetary penance can often be effective in relieving guilt, especially if the money is used to assist the injured party. Most indulgences, however, went into church coffers. Medici collectors were more often concerned with how much money a person could pay than whether or not the penance achieved any spiritual benefit from paying it. This is really where you have the rise of the mob. Actually, what the mob has always sort of done. Understandably, many Catholics grumbled, and their discontent helped pave the way for Martin Luther. History books tell us that Martin Luther was a German Catholic priest and an educator. He had begun his career as a monk in the Augustinian order and worked his way up to holding the chair of a biblical study at the University of Wittenberg in the German state of Saxony. As a Catholic priest, Luther was a subject to the strict regimen imposed upon all clergy of the church. That included regular attendance at confessional. In Catholic confessional, a person tells a priest in confidence of wrongs that the confessor has committed. This is designed to help unburden a person spiritually. As already mentioned, a properly done confessional has a positive effect, and interestingly, it does appear to be necessary at some point for nearly everyone's spiritual advancement. By Luther's day, however, confessionals were often done improperly or unnecessarily, so that people often felt little relief. Right, you got to keep going back and back, right, and keep paying the penance of the church every time. This is how they built the empire, folks. You understand? Luther eventually found going to confessional difficult. He had already come to hate the angry, condemning God of the Catholic religion, and as a result, he began to lose his faith in the Catholic way to salvation. There was, however, another equally important reason why Luther was having such difficulty in confessional. He had committed acts which he felt unable or unwilling to confess. Luther claims that he tried to purge himself of every conceivable sin, but some acts still eluded his memory when it came time to divulge them to his confessor. In part because of this, Luther did not feel himself advancing spiritually, and he despaired over ever achieving salvation. He felt compelled to seek another path to spiritual recovery that would not force him to endure the uncomfortable confessionals. Although Luther voiced many legitimate criticisms of the Catholic Church and claimed that he was trying to reestablish the primitive Christian Church of Jesus, Luther was, to an extent, a man driven by the demons of unconfessed wrongs. As a result, he helped create a new form of Christianity that only further departed from the true teachings of Jesus. Despite the East Roman corruption of Jesus' teachings and the brutal methods of the Inquisition, Catholicism during Luther's time still retained several important elements of Jesus' maverick lessons. For example, the Catholic Church continued to preach that salvation was up to the individual to achieve. It taught further the importance of doing good works, the need to confess sin when sin had been committed, and the importance of rectifying wrongs or compensating for them. The Catholic Church emphasized that man had the free will to either accept or reject salvation, that salvation could not be imposed upon anyone against his or her will, even by a monotheistic God, and that all people were endowed with the right to seek salvation. While Catholic teaching still had many serious flaws and lacked a true science of the Spirit, these ideas reflected some of the truth and decency which were at the heart of Jesus' message. Luther's key to reform would have been to reinforce the good tenets still alive in Catholicism while eliminating the blatant commercialism of the East Roman changes to Christian doctrine. That was not the road Luther chose to take. He taught instead the false idea that a person has no personal control over his spiritual salvation. Luther convinced people that salvation is dependent entirely upon the grace of a monotheistic God. There was only one action an individual could do to obtain God's grace, said Luther, and that was to believe in Jesus as Savior and to accept Christ's agony and crucifixion as penance for one's own sins. Luther's curious notion that Jesus' crucifixion can be penance for other people's sin is partially based on the concept of karma. Karma is the idea that all acts in this universe eventually come back at a person in the future. People frequently invoke the idea of karma when they ask, "What did I do to deserve this?" In modern science, karma has been expressed as for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. In monotheism, karma usually comes in the form of God's inevitable punishments for sin and rewards for good. On a personal level, the principle of karma seems to hold true in the sense that the world one creates, good or bad, through action or inaction, is ultimately the world that comes back to one. Poor ethics seem to be to boomerang in the form of spiritual degradation. A major benefit of a properly done confessional is that it actually seems to break the negative boomerang effect, and it will thereby help start a person back on the road to spiritual recovery. Because Luther's confessionals were unsatisfactory, he felt compelled to invent another way to escape the karma cycle enforced by the rewards and punishment of his monotheistic God. Luther therefore developed the idea that God would allow Jesus' pain and suffering on the cross to become the boomerang for everybody. In other words, by believing in Jesus, you will not spiritually suffer for the bad things you have done in the past because Jesus has already suffered for you. I'm sorry I had to laugh at that. It's just fucking ridiculous, man. This is a wonderfully magical notion, but it's hardly a philosophy of responsibility, nor is it fair to Jesus that he should expect to take the brunt of everyone else's wrongs. More importantly, Luther's solution simply does not work. Many people do feel and act better after proclaiming Christ because they've acknowledged their spiritual existences in a way that they have had not done before, and they often begin more ethical behavior as a result. But their active belief has not caused them to overcome the many other barriers which stand in the way of complete spiritual recovery. Protestants continue to practice confession, although it was no longer considered vital for achieving salvation. Practical knowledge of the Spirit was also largely ignored. Luther's method amounted to a quickie salvation, a simple act of belief. Luther taught that salvation was guaranteed by God for as long as a person continued to adhere to a belief in Jesus as Savior. Luther's ideas were clearly mystical. This is not surprising when we consider that Luther had been greatly influenced by some of the mystical religions which were so popular in his country. Luther's primary mentor in the Augustinian order, Johann von Staupitz, preached a theology containing many elements from the writings of the prominent German mystics Heinrich Suso and Johann Tauler. Tauler was one of the most widely read mystics of the 14th century, and he was associated with the Friends of God movement. Luther became an avid reader of Tauler's works. Evidence of a more direct connection of Luther to the Brotherhood network is found in Luther's personal seal. Luther's seal consisted of his initials on either side of two Brotherhood symbols, the rose and the cross. The rose and cross are the chief symbols of the Rosicrucian order. The word Rosicrucian itself comes from the Latin words rose and crucius, cross. Both during his life and after, Luther counted among his supporters important individuals and families who were active in the Illuminati and in Rosicrucianism. One of them was Philip the Magnanimous, head of the powerful royal house of Hesse, whose descendants would later hold important leadership positions in Brotherhood organizations, especially in German Freemasonry, as well as later, as we shall see later. As one of the prime leaders of the Reformation, Philip the Magnanimous found the Protestant University of Marburg and organized a political alliance against the Catholic German Emperor Charles V. After Luther's death, his religion was supported by Sir Francis Bacon. Go figure that, Sir Francis Bacon. William Shakespeare, Sir Francis Bacon, Freemasonry, Illuminati, blah, blah, blah. My goodness. And he was also at one time the Lord Chancellor of England. Bacon was also the highest executive of the Rosicrucian order in Great Britain. One of Bacon's greatest contributions to the Reformation arose from his efforts as the coordinator of a project to create an authorized English Protestant Bible under his King James I Bible, known as the King James Version. This was released in 1611 and became the most widely used Bible in the English-speaking and Protestant world. Luther and his supporters created the single largest schism in Christian history. Enormous power was wrestled from the Roman Catholic Church. The Protestant sects today account for about one-third of all Christians worldwide and nearly half of all Christians in North America. The Catholic Church did not allow this to happen without a fight, however. The Catholics launched a counter-reformation in an unsuccessful attempt to squelch the Protestant heresies. Leading the counter-reformation was, interestingly, a new Brotherhood-style organization created for the purpose. The Society of Jesus, better known as the Jesuits. The Jesuit order was founded in 1540 by a soldier-turned-cleric named Ignatius of Loyola. The Jesuits were a Catholic secret society with degrees of initiation, periods of probation, and many secret rituals. It was also militant. Jesuits were encouraged to adopt a soldierly spirit. Jesuits were encouraged to adopt a soldierly spirit of loyalty to their captain, Jesus. Ignatius was chosen to be the first general of the order in April 1741. The image of Jesus as a quasi-military captain may seem rather humorous to anyone familiar with Jesus' teachings, but the image was helpful in making the Jesuit order an effective cadre for combating the Protestants. Although it is true that the Reformation led the human race further away from spiritual understanding, it did have one very beneficial effect. It helped break the back of the Catholic Inquisition. The Inquisition had been one of the most oppressive institutions to burden the human spirit ever. Inquisitors meddled in nearly every human endeavor, from religion to the sciences to the arts. The Inquisition enforced some of the most hopelessly antiquated scientific thought by threatening people with torture and death. It hindered the development of many of the fine arts, notably theater. It probably did not greatly matter what the Protestants taught. They would have still been able to bring enormous relief to Europe as long as they were able to reduce the power of the Catholic Inquisition. There was an eventual price to be paid for this benefit, however, and that was the price of an ever-deepening materialism. Philosophies of humanism, rationalism, and similar ideologies with a materialistic bent took on renewed vigor in the Reformation climate. Most importantly, many of the positive effects of the Reformation were offset by the fact that Protestantism was yet one more human faction placed in unresolvable conflict with other factions over erroneous religious issues. Luther himself contributed to this by hinting that the Pope represented the forces of the Antichrist. The result had been more war, this time between Catholics and Protestants, notably today in Ireland. Despite the Brotherhood Network's continued pattern of generating conflict the centuries discussed in this chapter, it is important to note that a maverick influence had manifested itself in the Rosicrucian organization by the early 1600s. The Rosicrucian goal of individual spirit recovery and some of its teachings were remarkably similar to early maverick goals. Modern Rosicrucian literature from the United States continues to reflect some of this positive influence by attempting to propagate a more scientific view of spiritual phenomenon and by teaching that humans can intelligently control their lives. Unfortunately, modern Rosicrucianism still contains many custodial elements which will prevent adherents from achieving full spiritual rehabilitation. Although Rosicrucians contributed to the success of the Reformation, they did not achieve much fame until the year 1614, when, as noted earlier, a lodge of German Rosicrucians began a phase of outward activity by mass-producing a leaflet announcing the presence of Rosicrucians in Hesse' large principality, Hesse Castle. The pamphlet created a stir by urging people to abandon their false teachers, such as the Pope, Galen, and Aristotle. The pamphlet also told the story of a fictitious character, Christian Rosenkreuz, to symbolize the founding of the Rosicrucian order. The pamphlet is still best known by its shortened name, the Fama Fraternis. The full title of the leaflet, translated in English, is Universal and General Reformation of the Whole Wide World Together, with a noted fraternity of the Rosy Cross inscribed to all the learned and rulers of Europe. Despite the quaint, high-sounding tone, the leaflet's title revealed a deadly serious intent to create a broad, universal changes in human society. By the time of the Fama Fraternis, the Brotherhood Network had already launched its program to bring about this transformation. For the next several hundred years, the Brotherhood Network supplied the world with leaders who inspired and led violent revolutionary movements in all parts of the world in an effort to bring about a massive transmutation of human society. They succeeded, and we live today in the world they created. Well, that's doesn't get much truer than that. That's the end of chapter 19. We'll begin tomorrow reading chapter 20, A New Aristocracy. That's a great place to leave off. Yeah, I couldn't agree that more. We are living now in the result of the great work. I mean, we're living in the middle of it. Revolution is as old as history itself. People have been rebelling against gods, kings, and parents for millennia. So we hardly look at it as anything out of the ordinary. Luther's revolt was not a true revolution in the sense of blood being spilled. Luther and the Pope led no armies against one another. The Reformation did, however, lay the groundwork and provide the inspiration for numerous wars and violent political revolutions that were to sweep the globe for centuries to follow. One of the earliest political struggles to grow out of the Reformation was the 80 Years' War, which got fully underway by 1569. The 80 Years' War pitted Spain against that region of Europe we now know today as the Netherlands, which was then under Spanish rule, a new Protestant sect known as Calvinism, the origins of which will be discussed in chapter 22, had emerged by that time, and radical Calvinists from France had migrated to the Netherlands and created an activist Protestant community in Holland. This naturally caused friction between the devout Catholic rulers of Spain and the emerging Protestant minority of Holland. The Dutch minority not only sought religious freedom, but they soon craved political independence as well. The result was nearly a century of warfare. Many of the early Dutch struggles against Spain were led by William I the Silent, a German ruler who reigned over the German Principality of Nassau, not Nassau, the Bahamas, by the way, which bordered on Hesse in Germany over the French region of Orange. Hence, William's dynasty was simply known as the House of Nassau-Orange, or more simply, the House of Orange. Yeah, the House of Orange was bloodline to the tits, man. I mean, it's full-blown Merovingian right there. William led the fight in Holland partly because he had inherited large tracts of land there. The eventual success of the Dutch rebellions brought about the birth of a fully independent Netherlands. With independence came the establishment of a political and economic system that was to provide a model for revolutions in other countries. The Netherlands adopted a parliamentary form of government accompanied by a reduction of the monarch's power. Although the House of Orange became the Dutch royal family, and remains so to this very day, the monarch's role in the new government was reduced to that of stadtholder, or chief magistrate. The stadtholder could not hold office unless approved by the National Assembly, although there is often a mere formality. One intended effect of the parliamentary system was to prevent any single individual from achieving too much power. We might puzzle over why the German royal family of Nassau-Orange helped establish a political system in which their own power was reduced. It can be argued that they did so to encourage popular support for the revolt against Spain. After all, the House of Orange did gain a permanent position in the government. This does not fully solve the riddle because, as we shall see, other German royal families led coups and revolutions in which nearly identical political systems were erected. And few of those dynasties were acting entirely from noble impulses. A clue to resolving the puzzle is found in the fact that those German dynasties were deeply involved in brotherhood organizations. As we shall see in upcoming chapters, the evidence indicates that the families were promoting a brotherhood agenda from which the royals handsomely profited in other ways. That's because they were of the bloodlines of the custodial creators. In light of the role of the Brotherhood Network in promoting revolution and reducing monarchies, it might appear at first glance that the Brotherhood was back to its true uncorrupted purpose of opposing custodial institutions. After all, the institution of monarchy is traceable back to the custodial gods of ancient Sumeria. According to Mesopotamian tablets, the custodial society was ruled in a unique fashion. At the top was a council, or system of councils. Beneath the top councils were planetary subdivisions such as Earth. Each subdivision was ruled by individual custodians on a hereditary basis, but subject to the laws of the council. Now that is key. That is key because, ladies and gentlemen, that right there, that piece of info right there is the proof that this system of bloodline and lineage and everything that is so important to the elite, and the fact that they're horse breeders and people breeders and everything else, it proves right there what I have been saying on the show for 4 years, is that the bloodlines of the people that are in power and the royals and the people that are in power, I mean, even people that are, movie stars and rock stars and stuff are in these bloodlines. This originally was set up by these extraterrestrials. It's absolute proof because, again, that evidence that the government was and the power structure was set up that way comes from the Sumerian tablets. Again, according to Mesopotamian tablets, the custodial society was ruled in a unique fashion. At the top was a council or system of councils. Beneath the top council were planetary subdivisions such as Earth. Each subdivision was ruled by individual custodians on a hereditary basis, but subject to the laws of the council. According to ancient Sumerians, local hereditary custodial rulers were Earth's first kings. Those rulers naturally implanted their monarchical system on human society. We see intriguing evidence of this in those ancient Mesopotamian drawings that depict custodial gods bearing two objects which are now universal symbols of monarchy, the scepter and the tiara. The Sumerians state that the first human kings on earth were the offspring of the custodial rulers who mated with human women. Those matings entitled the half-human offspring to become early monarchs on earth. Thus was born the idea of royal blood and the perceived importance of maintaining proper royal breeding to ensure continued purity of the human royal bloodline. Interestingly, some ancient custodial gods were depicted as either blue-skinned or blue-blooded. This gave us the idea, and some say reality, of royal blue bloods. Aristocratic breeding practices have persisted through history and remain important to some royalty even today. No, it's important to everything in the whole power structure. Let me ask you something. You ever seen a Bush? You ever seen a Bush or a Clinton or any of these politicians? You ever seen them with a brown baby? You ever seen anybody in their family with a brown baby? You ever seen them? No, you don't, because they don't do that, because they keep their bloodlines pure. This is how they do it. So I'm sorry. Again, he wrote this book, in the early 90s. I'm sure Bramley has come a long way since then. Yeah, there's a lot more evidence now that, yeah, certainly this is way more important than, he's just saying, oh, it's important to some. Say, no, the whole system is based around these bloodlines. The whole system, the perceived illusion of them versus us, and they're in control and we aren't, is based on the fact that they believe because they are of pure stock, that gives them the divine right to rule. And the divine right to rule has been around since people have been around. It's just always been there. In light of the above, it would have been in keeping with the aims of the original uncorrupted brotherhood to eliminate monarchy and replace it with a parliamentary form of government in which human beings could choose their leaders. Had the brotherhood reformed itself by the time of William the Silent? Unfortunately, no. As we have seen before, the custodial influence caused valid aims and teachings of the brotherhood to acquire fatal twists. Precisely such a twist distorted the otherwise altruistic social and political goals of the brotherhood revolutionaries. The newly weakened monarchies and parliamentary governments allowed for greater power to be assumed by a new institution being installed by the revolutionaries. A new banking system and monetary system. This new monetary system was a major element of the revolutions of the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. Yet this fact is only minimally discussed in the majority of history books. Well, yeah, who do you think prints those damn history books? Those who ran and still run the new monetary system have been aptly labeled by one author, Howard Katz, as the paper aristocracy. The revolutions which began to sweep the world after the Reformation heralded the diminishment of the powerful political aristocracies in favor of the less visible, but in many ways equally potent monetary aristocracies. This happened because during the Reformation, banking and money lending, which were once viewed as lowly occupations, funny how that works, isn't it? Banking and money lending were for once considered lowly occupations. Yeah, not anymore. By the way, I'm sorry to interrupt while we're reading this. Did you guys hear what Matt Taibbi from Rolling Stone said about Wall Street? He said, you put Lloyd Blankfein in a pound-me-in-the-ass prison for a 6-month term, and all this bullshit would stop. It would be all stop all over Wall Street. That's all it would take, just once. Maybe, maybe not. These guys would probably enjoy being, 6 months in there getting slammed by Bubba. You know these guys. You know what they're into. This happened because during the Reformation, banking and money lending were once viewed as lowly occupations and were being forged into a renewed power due to a clever new science of money. This new money was a type of paper currency that could have its value deliberately and systematically diminished through a process known as inflation. And it's a type of money still in use today, This new money and the institutions which arose from it have had an enormous impact on our modern civilization. We cannot fully appreciate the effects of Protestantism and the revolutions which arose out of it without comprehending just how the new money system works. So that's the end of chapter 20 there. And the next chapter is chapter 21, Funny Money. Let me see how long this is. Yeah, this is a pretty long chapter. Well, let's see. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, that's more than I want to get into tonight, honestly. I guess I could read part of it and pick up the rest of it tomorrow. It just depends on what you guys are into. Oh, hell, fuck it. We got time. Let's go into a little bit more of this. All right, chapter 21, Funny Money. Let me get a drink here real quick. All right. I think before we get started here, I want to say I talked about this the other night. I mean, isn't it mind-blowing? If you haven't heard our entire reading, I know a lot of it is on YouTube. I think the first 12 chapters are up there. But isn't it funny that, because, you know, for years and years, you always heard in the Patriot movement, Truth movement stuff, you always heard people like Alex Jones say, oh, you know, don't talk about the extraterrestrials or the Anunnaki. Don't talk about, you know, the Sumerian stuff. And it's funny that all of that stuff ties directly into the priest class and ties directly into the people and the controllers and the Council for National Policy and the Jesuit order and how they control the John Birch Society, and Alex Jones coming from a John Birch Society family there and his multiple connections with the Jesuits all the way across the board. And yet, you know, always say, oh, yeah, just look into the bankers, look into the bankers. Well, the bankers and the whole banking system was created by these custodial extraterrestrial bastards. And it blows my mind now to figure out that you know, this is the explanation as to why for years this guy's been telling you not to look into this stuff. I mean, it's completely revelatory to me. You know, it's such a big revelation. I mean, I've known this, but really reading this book, I've understood more than anything else why there has been such a moratorium put on this information. Because when people uncover this and they uncover the source of everything, it's going to be over for the hucksters and, you know, these snake oil salesmen in the Truth and Patriot movement. I mean, it's just over for them. Few topics occupy as many minds or stimulate as many emotions as money. Well, what's the answer to 99 out of 100 questions, folks? Money. This is largely because money is an overwhelming problem to a majority of people. One thing which causes modern money to be a problem is inflation. Whether inflation is climbing at 3% annually or 300% inflation, of course, is the situation in which the cost of goods and services steadily rise due to the ever-decreasing value of money. This happens when the money supply becomes larger in proportion to the supply of valuable goods and services. Money itself is not valuable, only the goods and services that can be bought with it are. The wealth of any individual or nation, therefore, is ultimately determined by what it produces in terms of valuable products and services, not by how much money it prints, distributes, or holds. A nation could actually survive without any currency at all, as long as it was otherwise productive. Oh, shit, don't tell people that. Oh, my God. You mean we could get along and be productive without having money? Oh, my God. Let's not talk about that. Folks, don't look into that. Don't look into that extraterrestrial stuff, folks, okay? They're going to tell you that we can have a society without money. They're going to tell you all this stuff. They're just anti-capitalist commies, you know. That's the only people looking at that stuff, anti-capitalist commies. That's all it is. By the way, Ted's going to come on and tell you about this Jew gold he's got for you today. It's good stuff. Money changers will be proud. Money is therefore an extension of the barter system. Well, it's supposed to be. Barter is the act of trading something one possesses or does for something of someone else's. Production and barter are the basis of all economy. Coins and paper money were originally created to assist in barter. They allowed people to barter without having to carry around actual goods or immediately deliver a service. This permitted individuals to trade more easily and to save the profits of their labors for the future. Paper money initially began as promissory notes. A promissory note was written as a promise to pay a debt, And a person would write a note on a piece of paper promising the bearer of the note a certain quantity of goods or services that the note writer could provide on demand. To illustrate, let us look at the following fictitious example. Let us pretend that a chicken farmer was in the village market and wanted to trade for a basket of apples. He did not have his chickens with him, so he might write a note to the apple seller entitling the bearer of the note to come to the farm at any time to pick up 2 healthy chickens. The chicken farmer would be able to walk away with his basket of apples, and it would be up to the apple grower to visit the farm one day and redeem the note by getting his 2 chickens. As long as people have faith in the chicken farmer's ability to honor his notes, he will be able to use them for barter. Let us now pretend that as the day draws to a close, the apple grower decides to have a look around the market. He comes across the cloth merchant. The apple grower's wife has been henpecking him for days to buy some of the new silk that just arrived on a caravan from the Far East. The apple grower's home life has been made miserable by her unceasing demands and her denial of wifely comforts. Yeah, she won't fuck him. Which is where every problem starts, right there. I mean, how far are we going back here? You know, cloth merchants and fucking all this shit. I mean, this has been going on forever. She won't fuck him unless she buys him something nice. He buys something nice instead of taking care of business, and everything goes to shit. I mean, you think we'd learn at some point. So he negotiates with the cloth merchant for some silk. The cloth merchant, however, does not need any more apples. So the apple grower, remembering that he has a note for 2 chickens, asks the merchant if the merchant needs poultry. The merchant says that he does, and the apple grower gives him the note for 2 chickens in exchange for silk. It is now up to the cloth merchant to trudge on up to the chicken farm to redeem the note. The chickens themselves have never left the coop, yet they have changed ownership twice in one day. This type of exchange was all that paper money was initially created for. But do you see the temptation that it can open up? If the chicken farmer knows that some time will pass before he must redeem his notes with actual chickens, or that some of his notes will circulate forever and never come in for redemption, he may be tempted to issue more notes than he has in actual chickens, thinking that he will be able to cover all the notes by the time they come back to him. Temptation now gets the best of the chicken farmer. The chicken farmer has a big family get-together coming up, and he wants to impress his in-laws for once by putting on an opulent feast. Down to the market he goes, where he writes notes for chickens not yet hatched and stocks up with an abundance of goods from other merchants. Several things can now happen. The chicken farmer will get away with it if he's always able to meet the demand for chickens when his notes come in for redemption. Another thing that may and often will occur is that he has so saturated the marketplace with his chicken notes that most people just do not want them anymore. So he must offer even more hens for each trade to make people feel that it is worth their while. He is now writing notes for 2 or 3 chickens in exchange for items which he previously had only to issue single chicken notes. That's what we need, chicken notes. Hey, boy, I'm going to give you this chicken note right here. Here you go. A vicious spiral ensues. The more notes the chicken farmer issues, the less valuable they become, and this is more that he has to issue in order to get what he wants. This is known as inflation. Now comes the worst part. With more and more notes outstanding, an increasing number of notes will start coming in for redemption. Soon the farmer will see that his true wealth, which is his supply of chickens, is becoming rapidly depleted, even though only a small portion of his outstanding notes have come back. To preserve his chickens, he must decrease the value of his notes by declaring that the outstanding notes are now only good for half of what they say. This is called devaluation. Since the farmer may find it difficult to admit that he had issued many more notes than he had chickens, he may try to save his reputation by lying, such as saying that a fierce chicken plague has wiped out half of his stock. That will probably not prevent him from becoming very unpopular. Public faith in his notes will be destroyed. He will either have to revert back to straight barter, or else he will need to acquire someone else's notes in order to continue trading in the market. As we can see, paper notes or money are rooted in actual commodities and are meant to be an expression that the creator of the notes has something valuable to trade. In contrast to notes or coins, which function somewhat differently, metals have always been considered valuable, and so pieces of metal were convenient trading tools. Many pieces were imprinted with various designs, thereby becoming coins, and their metallic purity was guaranteed by the imprinter. Coin values were initially determined by the quantity and purity of the metal contained within the coins. Gold was a rare and popular metal, so coins made from gold were more expensive and had a higher barter value than, for instance, copper coins. Metal coins became a popular tool of barter because they were durable and quantities could be controlled. They did create some problems, however. Realistically, people were only trading pieces of metal for other goods. This created a disproportionate emphasis on metals. The acquisition of coins and coin metal became an obsession to a great many people, and such obsessions tend to drain away energy better spent producing other valuable goods and services. This system also gave a disproportionate amount of power to those who possessed large quantity of coined metals, even though some other commodities, such as food, and ultimately more valuable. The person with the coin metals could immediately acquire any good or service, but a farmer first had to go through the intermediate step of exchanging his product for a coin or coin metal before he could have the same spending flexibility. So, this is a very interesting chapter, and he's kind of, sort of dumbing down the whole monetary system thing for you there. I sort of like that. It sort of puts it in common sense terms for people to understand, how this occurred and just how far back this goes and how far this is going on and how the illusion that we participate in is what ultimately what keeps us enslaved. So if we can ever finally see through this illusion, then it can no longer have power on us if we don't believe that it's real. But what keeps that going now, what perpetuates that now is, it's just everything, everything from new gadgets that come out, new toys, wanting to keep up with the Joneses, it's just programming, Madison Avenue, Edward Bernays stuff. Where we left off last night was this analogy about the chicken farmer and the analogy about, basically how the monetary system works. And so I'll back up a little bit just to give you a little context of what we were talking about here. The chicken farmer has a big family get-together coming up, and he wants to impress his in-laws for once by putting on an opulent feast. Down to the market he goes, where he writes notes for chickens not yet hatched and stocks up with an abundance of goods from other merchants. Several things can now happen. The chicken farmer will get away with it if he is able to meet the demand for chickens when his notes come in for redemption. Another thing that may and often will occur is that he has so saturated the marketplace with his chicken notes that most people just do not want any more of them. So he must offer even more hens for each trade to make people feel it is worth their while. He is now writing notes for 2 or 3 chickens in exchange for items which he previously only had to issue single chicken notes. As these chicken notes circulate, they become less and less valuable because there are so many of them. A vicious spiral ensues. The more notes the chicken farmer issues, the less valuable they become, and the more he has to issue in order to get what he wants. This is known as inflation. Now comes the worst part. With more and more notes outstanding, an increasing number of notes will start coming in for redemption. Soon the farmer will see that his true wealth, which is his supply of chickens, is becoming rapidly depleted, even though only a small portion of his outstanding notes have come back. To preserve his chickens, he must decrease the value of his notes by declaring that the outstanding notes are now only good for half of what they say. This is called devaluation. Since the farmer may find it difficult to admit that he had issued many more notes than he had chickens, he may try to save his reputation by lying, such as by saying that a fierce chicken plague has wiped out half of his stock. That will probably not prevent him from becoming very unpopular. Public faith in his notes will be destroyed, and he will either have to revert back to straight barter, or else he will need to acquire someone else's notes in order to continue trading in the market. So this picks up where we left off last night. As we can see, paper notes or money are rooted in actual commodities and are meant to be an expression that the creator of the notes has something valuable to trade. In contrast to notes are coins, which function somewhat differently. Metals have always been considered valuable, and so pieces of metal were convenient trading tools. Metal pieces were imprinted with various designs, thereby becoming coins, and their metallic purity was guaranteed by the imprinter. Coin values were initially determined by the quantity and purity of the metal contained within the coins. Gold was a rare and more popular metal, so coins made from gold were more expensive and had a higher barter value than, for instance, copper coins. Metal coins became a popular tool for barter because they were durable and quantities could be controlled. They did create some problems, however. Realistically, people were only trading pieces of metal for other goods. This created a disproportionate emphasis on metals. The acquisition of coins and coin metals became an obsession to a great many people, and such obsessions tend to drain away energy better spent producing other valuable goods and services. This system also gave a disproportionate amount of power to those who possessed large quantities of coined metals, even though other commodities such as food are ultimately more valuable. The person with the coined metals could immediately acquire any good or service, but a farmer first had to go through the intermediate step of exchanging his product for a coin or metal before he could have the same spending flexibility. Coin metals merged with paper notes to create the foundation of our modern monetary system in the 1600s. Those who laid this foundation were reportedly the goldsmiths. Goldsmiths usually owned the strongest safes and lockboxes in town. For this reason, many people deposited their coin metals with the smiths for safekeeping. The smiths issued receipts to the depositors that promised to pay to the receipt holders on demand those quantities of gold or silver shown on the receipts. Each such receipt was actually a note which could be circulated as money until a holder of the note went back to the goldsmith to redeem it for the specified amount of metal. The goldsmiths made an important discovery. Under normal circumstances, only about 10% to 20% of their receipts ever came back for redemption at any given time. The rest circulated in the community as money, and for good reason. Paper was easier to carry than bulky coin, and people felt safer holding receipts in lieu of actual gold and silver. The smiths realized that they could lend out the unredeemed metals and charge interest, and thereby earn money as lenders. In making such a loan, however, the smith would try to convince the borrower to accept the loan in the form of a receipt instead of actual metal. The borrower could then circulate that note as money. As we can see, the goldsmith has now created money, his receipts, for double the actual quantity of metal he has in his safe. First to the original depositor and then to a borrower. The goldsmith did not even own the metal in his safe, yet by simply writing upon a piece of paper, someone now owes him money up to the full value of the gold in his safe. The smith could continue writing his notes as long as the notes coming in for redemption did not exceed his actual deposits of precious metals. Typically, a smith would issue notes for 4 to 5 times in excess of his actual supply of gold. As profitable as this operation may have been, there were some pitfalls. If too many of the goldsmith's notes came back for redemption too rapidly, or the smith's borrowers were slow to repay, the smith would be wiped out. The credibility of his notes would be destroyed. If the smith ran his operation cautiously, however, he could become quite wealthy without ever producing anything of value. Right, and this is where we enter the Jew bankers, I suppose. Right? They had to become stingy with their gold so they could gain power. And that's how the stereotype came in, right? Well, I'm guessing. I'm sorry. The shit's just ridiculous, and I have to laugh sometimes. I apologize. It's just stupid. The injustice of this system is obvious. If for every sack of gold the smith had on deposit, people now owed him the equivalent of 4 sacks, someone has to lose. As public debt to the goldsmith increased, more and more true wealth and resources were owed to him. Since the goldsmith was not producing any true wealth or resources, but was demanding an ever-increasing share of them because of his paper notes, he easily became a parasite upon the economy. Which is exactly why the Vatican found out about that same racket that the Templars were running and said, you know what? Here's what we're going to do. We're going to claim that what they're doing is against Jesus and against the church. We'll say that they're heretics. We'll kill them all. we'll take their knowledge, we'll take their riches, and we'll continue that power. We'll continue on what they've done. He said, what we'll do is we'll put the Jews in charge of it, since everybody believes that the Jews killed Jesus. We'll put the Jews in charge of our money and in charge of this racket that the Templars created on behalf of the church to take over the whole world. And if anybody gets too close to trying to figure out what it is, well, we'll just blame it on our Jew bankers that we put out there in front, and then, we got plausible deniability. That about brings us up to date. I mean, seriously. The inevitable result was the enrichment of the careful goldsmith-turned-banker at the cost of the impoverishment of other people in the community. That impoverishment was manifested either in the people's need to give up things of value or in their need to toil longer to create the wealth needed to repay the banker. If the goldsmith was not careful and his monetary bubble burst, the people around him suffered anyway due to the disruption caused by the collapse of his bank and the loss of the value of his notes still in circulation. Such was the birth of modern banking. Many people feel that it is an inherently dishonest system, and it is. It is also socially and economically destabilizing, yet all of the world's major monetary and banking systems today operate on a close variation of the system I just described. By the 17th century, the Medici banking house of Italy had come up with the idea of using gold as the commodity upon which to base all paper currency. I said papal currency. Well, I guess I wasn't wrong now, was I, boy? Hell no! Papal currency. That's what we're calling it from now on. That's going to be our new meme. The meme of the week. Yeah, there it is. I'm not calling it paper currency. It's papal currency. Fuck yeah, dude. Put it on the board. Put that motherfucker on the board. That's going on the board. That's a new one. Papal currency. Hey, man, got any of that papal currency going around? No, man, I don't believe in that papal currency, man. It's just an illusion anyway, bro. Oh, it's good stuff. Papal currency. That's what we're calling it from now on. I'm sorry, I'm out of control. Let me continue here. I got to figure out where I left off at. Gold was touted as the perfect basis for paper notes because of the scarcity of the desirability of gold. This was the beginning of the gold standard, in which all other goods and services are valued in relation to gold and sometimes silver. The gold standard was certainly a terrific idea for those people who own plenty of gold and silver, but it created an artificial reliance on a commodity that is not nearly as useful as many other products. To base an entire monetary system on a single commodity is better than basing it upon no commodities at all, but even under a gold standard, paper notes will far exceed the metals used to back the notes. The best solution is to root a money supply firmly in a nation's entire valuable output, so that the money acts as an accurate reflection of that output. Once the gold standard was created, paper notes were thought to be as good as gold. Now you see why these ass clown fucking priest-classed Jesuit fucking Catholic-owned shills like Ron Paul and others. Oh, we need to go back to the gold standard. Let's go back to that. What the Anunnaki created. Let's go back to that. The gold standard was created by God. Makes me want to puke. Sick fucks. I'm glad I never gave any fucking money to Ron Paul. My God. Fuck that guy right in his dirty shithole. Fuck him and his whole goddamn Masonic fucking Catholic family. Once the gold standard was created, paper notes were thought to be as good as gold because people could redeem the notes for actual gold. This created a false sense of security. As more and more gold notes entered the market, they gradually became worth less and less, resulting in a steady inflation. The gold owners and bankers had to stop issuing a constant stream of notes because that is how they earned their profits. As long as the bankers planned carefully and people retained their faith in the notes, the note writers could stay ahead of the inevitable inflation they created and make an enormous profit off of it. If, on the other hand, they issued an overabundance and too many of their notes came back for redemption, they could, as a last resort, devalue the notes to save their gold. In this fashion, inflatable paper money, even under a gold standard, became a source of wealth and power to those entitled to create the money. Boom. Again, one of the other million reasons why the Truth and Patriot movement, at large have just ignored this book, ignored this work. It also generated indebtedness on an enormous scale because most of the created out of nothing gold notes were released into the community as loans repayable to the bankers. If people did not borrow from the bankers, little new money would enter the market and the economy would slow down. This method of creating money clearly destroyed the true purpose of money, to represent the existence of actual tradable commodities. Inflatable paper money allows a handful of people to absorb and manipulate a great deal of true wealth, which are the valuable goods and services people produce. Simply through the act of printing paper and then slowly destroying the value of that paper with inflation, it causes money to become its own commodity, which can be manipulated on its own terms, usually to the detriment of the production and barter system. Money was meant to assist that system, not to dominate and control it. The inflatable paper money system described above was the new science of money being installed by Brotherhood revolutionaries. An early version of the system was established in Holland in 1609. That was the year in which the Dutch and Spanish forces signed a truce suspending the hostilities of the 80 Years' War. The truce marked the birth of the independent Dutch Republic and the founding of the Bank of Amsterdam in the same year. The privately owned Bank of Amsterdam operated on the inflatable paper money system described above. It was run by a group of financiers who pooled some of their precious metals to form the asset base of the bank. By prior agreement with the new Dutch government, the bank helped Dutch forces resume the wars against Spain by issuing notes 4 times in excess of the bank's asset base. The Dutch magistrates were then able to draw out 3/4 of the quote-unquote created out of nothing money to finance the conflict. This reveals the primary reason why the inflatable paper money system was created. Listen closely, ladies and gentlemen. It enables nations to fight and prolong their wars. It also makes the human struggle for physical existence in a modern economy more difficult due to the massive debt and parasitic absorption of wealth that the system causes. You start to understand what's going on in the United States now? They are using this deflationary, phony economic system that they're forcing us all into to fund and continue their wars while they simultaneously bring down our country and bring down all countries and bring down people to a more controllable level. Can't you see this? Don't you care? TV and Hot Pockets and video games and getting drunk and banging prostitutes, that's all gone if you don't understand this. Got me? This is so key to understand. This is the essence of everything. This is how they gotten us. That's everything. 9/11 is such a distraction. It's just one of those things that they did to bring this along. This slow and steady, sustained, 9/11 was the first, the reason they called it ground zero, folks, well, on top of the fact that they probably used some sort of nuclear weapon there, but that's neither here nor there, is because it was the epicenter, folks. It was the first shot heard around the world in this sustained warfare and sustained bombardment that has been executed through the monetary system against all peoples of the world. It's been a slow downhill climb since then. Furthermore, steady inflation reduces the value of people's money so that their accumulated wealth is gradually eroded. The custodial aims expressed in the Garden of Eden and the Tower of Babel stories were greatly furthered by the new paper money system. The initial success of the Bank of Amsterdam encouraged similar banking arrangements in other nations. The most notable offspring was the Bank of England, founded in 1694. The Bank of England established the pattern for our modern-day central banks by refining the inflatable paper money system of Holland. The Bank of England system was subsequently spread from nation to nation, often on the backs of revolutions led by prominent Brotherhood Network members. That's a key piece of info. That's exactly what they're trying to do right now. The Bank of England system was subsequently spread from nation to nation, often on the backs of revolutions led by prominent Brotherhood Network members. They're trying to set up a new monetary system in the United States, and they're going to use these gold hucksters to use it and sell it on the back of this phony revolution. It's going on right now. They're trying to do it right now. The worldwide Reformation announced in the Fama Fraternis was well underway by the end of the 17th century, and the new money was a big part of it, as we shall see more later. So there you go. That's the end of chapter 21. The next chapter is 22. Chapter 22, Marching Saints. One of the most important leaders of the Reformation was John Calvin. Calvin was only 10 years old when Luther broke from the Catholic Church, but as an adult, Calvin became one of Protestantism's most zealous advocates. Calvin published his first religious tract in 1536 in Basel, Switzerland, a city by the Swiss-German border. Calvin spent his adult life writing and teaching his own unique interpretations of Protestant doctrine. The result was the creation of a Protestant denomination named after him, Calvinism, which was headquartered in Geneva. Consequently, as we just read in the last chapter, also where they ended up setting up, all the Swiss banks. No coincidence there. Calvin continued in the mystical vein of Martin Luther, as we recall. Luther said that the spiritual salvation was not something that a human being could achieve through his or her own labors. Wrong. Thanks for playing. Instead, salvation required an act of belief. The same idea was promulgated by Calvin, but with a harder twist. According to Calvin's doctrine, not even an act of faith or belief would ensure a person's spiritual survival. Calvin proclaimed instead that a person's spiritual salvation, or lack of it, was already predetermined before birth by God. Not only had God decided in advance who would achieve spiritual salvation and who would not, but there was absolutely nothing a person could do about God's decision. This unhappy doctrine is known as predestination. Calvin's predestination teachings offered people little comfort because they had stressed that most human beings were spiritually condemned. Those humans favored by God before birth were known as the elect. The elect were few in number and could do nothing to share their good fortune with others. The elect had only one real duty on earth, proclaimed Calvin, and this was to suppress the sin of others as a service to God. Calvin, of course, was one of the elect. One might ask, why would God condemn nearly every soul before birth and then continue to punish them after birth? It seems rather cruel. According to Calvin, the human race was still being punished for the original sin of Adam and Eve. As we recall, the original sin was early man's attempt to gain knowledge of ethics and spiritual immortality. Calvin did not attempt to justify predestination despite its obvious unfairness. He preached instead that predestination was a mystery to which all people should be humbled. Many things of God were never meant to be understood by human beings, he said. Calvinism was more than a Sunday religion. It was a way of life. It demanded of its adherents a pragmatic and austere lifestyle in which a person's highest duty was to glorify God in his or her daily actions. People were taught that their positions in life, no matter what those positions happen to be, were their callings by God. A life should be lived as though it were a supreme being's will that a person was where he or she was. Calvinism was clearly a philosophy of feudalism for the modern age. On religious grounds, Calvin forbade drunkenness, gambling, dancing, and singing flippant tunes. Those were among the sins that the elect had been put on earth to stamp out. To no one's surprise, Calvinists quickly developed a reputation for being dour and colorless. Yeah, fucking sourpusses. Lamos. They also grew violent. Calvin was not a man of tolerance, and he adopted some of the vicious practices of the East Roman emperors. For example, Calvin encouraged the death penalty for heresy against his new doctrines, and he demanded that witches be burned to death at the stake. Calvinism traveled from its stronghold to Switzerland to other countries. In the Netherlands, Calvinists had played a very large role in agitating and bringing about the 80 Years' War, which gave us the Bank of Amsterdam. In Great Britain, Calvinism was the basis of the Puritan religion. Like their Calvinist brethren in Holland, some English Puritans decided to assert their gloomy beliefs and material self-interest through violent revolution. In the year 1642, a group of wealthy and prominent British Puritans led a full-scale civil war against the English King Charles I. In Puritan eyes, Charles had committed crimes against God by marrying a Catholic and by being tolerant of Catholicism. After winning the Civil War and beheading Charles, the victorious Puritan armies placed their own dictator in charge of Britain, Oliver Cromwell. Under Cromwell, the Puritans were able to assert their religious beliefs into the arena of foreign policy. English Puritans believed strongly in the concept of Armageddon. Folks, my family goes all the way back to the Puritans, folks, all the way back to the Mayflower, folks. Yeah, my distant relatives going all the way back to that, folks. Yeah, that's true. I mean, seriously, the Ascalon Jones has said that before. So yeah. That's some great heritage you got there, Bubba. Puritans believe strongly in the concept of Armageddon, the final battle. They believe that the great final battle. They believed that the final battle had begun and would climax in the later 17th century. Yes, climax. Oh, yeah, that's what we like. We like words like that. And that the Puritans' civil war against Charles I was part of that battle. The Pope was labeled the Antichrist, and Catholicism was considered Satan's tool. Well, it'd be hard for me to argue with that, except I don't believe in Satan either. Another one of their fucking priest class. Oh, Satan, yes, you're going to go down to hell, and you're going to have to shoot Satan's cold for eternity if you don't believe in Jesus. Jesus cannot save you. Only I can save you. I am the dark Lord Satan. Suck my God, bitch. The Pope was labeled the Antichrist, and Catholicism was considered Satan's tool. Cromwell tried to shape English foreign policy around these beliefs by working to solidify international Protestant unity and by waging war against Catholics in various parts of Europe. Cromwell believed that the English Puritans were God's second chosen people and that his actions were all a part of biblical prophecy. Calvinist cosmology did much to shape Puritan ideas about war. Engaging in war was glorified. The Puritans believed that the tension and struggle were permanent elements of the cosmic scheme because of the internal battle between God and Satan. Professor Michael Walzer, in his intriguing book, Revolution of the Saints, a study of the origins of radical politics, explains their belief this way. As there is permanent opposition and conflict in the cosmos, so is there permanent warfare on earth. This tension was itself an aspect of salvation. A man at ease was a man lost. It is vital to understand this Puritan idea because it exalts war as a necessary step to spiritual salvation. It was also one of the seeds which gave us the Marxist philosophy of dialectical materialism. This Puritan belief is one of the most pernicious ideas ever taught by the custodial religions. It caused Puritans to view peace as an affront to God because peace meant that the struggle against Satan had ceased. How ridiculous is that? The world's peace is the keenest war against God, wrote Thomas Taylor in 1630. The highest calling of a Puritan man was to march off to war for the glory of God. When there were, heaven forbid, no wars in progress, men were encouraged to attend military drills for recreation. Nothing's really changed. Oh, there ain't no war going on. Let's have some war games. Yeah. Well, there ain't no war, but let's have some war games because we do got a war. Let's get ready for it. There'll be a war eventually. I ain't one right now, but hell, there'll be one pretty soon. Let's have some war games. Let's train for it. Sir, we've stamped out all war. There is no more war on Earth. Well, in case there is, well, we'll be ready for it. And in religious aspects, since every man will have recreations, that be best which is freest from sin, that best which strengthen a man, then abandon your carding, dicing, chambering, wantonness, dalliance, scurrilous, discoursing, and vain reveling out of time to frequent these exercises or these military drills. I get the sneaking suspicion that William Bramley might be just a little bit anti-war. Maybe just with good reason. I am as well, but I think that's the big thesis. I think that's his big thesis is, well, I think in fact I think I've heard him say that too. That's the whole reason he got into this was trying to prove where trying to disprove the idea that war is a necessary part of the human existence. And I would say that this is one of the best, if not the best, pieces of work that just wholeheartedly proves that that's a complete falsehood, a complete lie, something forced upon us. The Puritans' embodiment of war, coupled with their austere pragmatism, helped to bring about major changes in the manner of fighting wars. Generations earlier, the Renaissance had a very interesting effect on warfare in Europe. War had become a gentleman's activity, ornate and full of bluster. European rulers expanded considerable sums of money to create aesthetic and colorful armies. Bright uniforms, flapping banners, and fancy armor were the order of the day. Significantly, pageantry replaced combat on the battlefield. More often than not, the dazzling Renaissance armies engaged in endless maneuverings against one another with little actual contact. After a great deal of pomp and show, a military stalemate would often occur, followed by an elegant cavalry maneuver known as the caracole. Each side would then declare itself the winner with a few or no casualties and march colorfully home in the adulation of its people. Young male soldiers survived to quicken their lovers' pulses with noble tales of gallantry and honor in the field. In today's jaded, ultra-pragmatic world, the above activity might seem rather silly, like something from The Wizard of Oz. They were, however, an exceptionally important phenomenon because the Renaissance style of warfare revealed the true nature of the human spirit. The majority of people will gravitate away from war when given the chance. They will turn arenas of conflict into theaters of pageantry. They will choose life, color, and artistry over death, pallor, and decay. The Renaissance was a short period of history, revealing that when repression is ceased, when intolerance and war-inducing philosophies diminish in importance, and when people are able to think and act more freely, human beings as a whole will naturally and automatically move away from war. Puritan austerity and glorification of war helped make European wars bloodier. Puritan armies operated on the idea that wars were meant to be fought effectively, not colorfully. With that in mind, Puritans eliminated military glitter and developed efficient fighting units through rigorous drilling. This pragmatic way of fighting quickly spread when other nations discovered that a beautifully embroidered banner could not win against an effectively pointed cannon. While most military organizations today still engage in some pageantry, it is noticeably absent in the actual conduct of war. We observe instead austere fighting uniforms, curt efficiency, and military strategists who coldly calculate nuclear megadeath with percentage points and profitability factors. They are all reflections of the pragmatism reintroduced into war by the Puritans and other Protestants. As we survey the war-mangled bodies of our fellow humans who have been killed more efficiently and more pragmatically, perhaps, we realize that Renaissance pageantry was not so silly after all. Despite its early successes, the new Puritan government under Cromwell did not last very long. The Stuart dynasty reigned in the British throne in 1660 with the crowning of Charles II. Well, that's the Stuart bloodline. That's the bloodline, Merovingian bloodline Phyllis Schlafly is half part of. She's part of the Stuart bloodline and the Bruce bloodline. That's why they worship that beast. Charles II died 25 years later in 1685 without an heir, and so his brother James II took the throne. James ruled a mere 3 years, after which a second English revolution was launched in 1688, known as the Glorious Revolution. Although a big issue was still Protestantism versus Catholicism, the Puritans did not lead the Glorious Revolution. In fact, a great many Puritans had fled England to establish colonies in North America after Charles II assumed the throne. The Glorious Revolution was led in part by none other than the House of Orange-Nassau. By the time of the Glorious Revolution, the House of Orange was firmly seated on the Dutch throne. How Orange also came to take the British throne and reign over 3 nations at once is a fascinating story of political intrigue, and it's one we will have to get to next time on the broadcast. That is Chapter 23, William and Mary Have a War. King Charles II of England and his brother's successor, James II, had a sister, Mary, who had married the Dutch Prince of Orange. This marriage created a family tie between the royal houses of Britain and Holland. This tie was further strengthened by the marriage of James II's daughter, Mary II, to the son of the Prince of Orange, William III. Royal marriages in those times were not only matters of breeding, they were also designed to secure political advantages and were often arranged with all of the sophistication and cunning of an espionage coup. Several German royal families were masters at the game. They were notorious for marrying into foreign royal families as a stepping stone to seizing power in those other nations. The House of Orange-Nassau was a member of that treacherous German clique. The Stuart family, after its hard-won struggle to regain the English throne, fell into the trap. Its marriages into the House of Orange helped bring the Stuart monarchy to a permanent end during the Glorious Revolution of 1688. To understand how this happened and why all of this is important to us, let us briefly review the Glorious Revolution. A powerful group of Englishmen and Scots had formed a Protestant political faction in England known as the Whigs. The Whigs were actually headquartered in Holland, which, of course, was under the monarchy of the House of Orange. From their Dutch base, the Whigs launched the Glorious Revolution of 1688 and quickly unseated James II in a bloodless coup. The Whigs then placed James II's son-in-law, William III of Orange, on the British throne. The House of Orange now reigned over both Holland and England, as well as over their original German homeland. Behind this intrigue, we see the shadow of the Brotherhood. William III is reported to have been a Freemason. In fact, in 1688, a militant secret society was formed to support William III. It was called the Order of Orange, after William III's family, and it patterned itself after Freemasonry. The Orange Order was anti-Catholic, and its purpose was to ensure that Protestantism remained the dominant Christian religion of England. The Orange Order had survived the centuries and is today strongest in Ireland, where it has over 100,000 members. It is perhaps best known for its annual public parade to commemorate the successes of William III in England. Upon his assumption of the British throne, William III quickly undertook to erect the same institutions in England as those which had been established by his dynasty in Holland. A strong parliament with a weakened monarchy and a central bank operating on an inflatable paper currency. I can't even say it anymore. I keep saying papal currency because that's what it is. God, I can't even say paper currency anymore, I tell you. A papal currency. William and his Queen Mary II also promptly launched England into expensive wars against Catholic France. The man chosen to organize the English central bank under William III was a mysterious Scottish adventurer named William Paterson, of whom very little was apparently known. The British House of Commons, the Parliament, was at first reluctant to accept Paterson's central bank scheme, but relented as the British national debt continued to skyrocket from the conflicts launched by the very warlike William III. The paper money system, with its built-in inflation, was touted as the way to finance the costly wars. Taxes already high as they could reasonably go, and so the House of Commons felt that it had no alternative but to institute the scheme. The Bank of England was thereby born, and warfare could continue just as war continued in Holland after the Bank of Amsterdam had been created there. The Bank of England has been labeled by some economists the mother of all central banks. It became the model for all central banks which followed it, including the central banks of today. Under the Bank of England scheme, the central bank was to be the nation's primary bank, and it would lend exclusively to the national government. The central bank's entire purpose was to put the government into debt and to be the government's major creditor. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? The central bank's notes would be lent to the government, and those notes would then circulate as national currency. This would cause the nation and its people to rely on those notes as money. The establishment of the Bank of England caused Britain to go deeply into debt to a monetary elite, the paper aristocracy, which could then influence the use of the nation's resources. This is the modus operandi of every central bank today. Like most modern central banks, the Bank of England was a privately owned or privately operated bank with quasi-governmental status. In accordance with Patterson's plan, the financiers who pulled their resources to create the Bank of England received approval from the government to issue gold and silver notes in a quantity many times exceeding the financiers' pooled holdings. The standard practice of bankers during that period was to issue notes 4 to 5 times in excess of their precious metals. The Bank of England, however, issued an incredible multiplication of 16 2/3. The British government agreed to borrow those notes and honor them as legal money for use in its purchases. The government accepted this plan because the government was not required to repay the initial loan, only the interest on the loan. Would not the Bank of England lose money on such a deal? Not at all. The face value of the loan notes were many times in excess of the value of the actual assets on which the notes were based. The interest on the loan in just 1 year surpassed the total value of the precious metals of the Bank of England. Specifically, the financiers had put together a total base of 72,000 pounds of actual gold and silver. By issuing notes valued at 16 2/3 times the base, the bank was able to make a loan to England of 1,200,000 pounds in paper money. The yearly interest rate was 8 1/3%, which equaled 100,000 pounds. This amount amounted to a profit of 28,000 pounds, or 39% rather, in just 1 year. Unbelievable. That's the model. That's what's continuing on today. We just go along with it like suckers, don't we? 22 years after the Bank of England was established, an identical bank was set up in France in 1716. The founder of the French version was John Law, who became the finance minister of France. Law has been dubbed the father of inflation for his efforts. The title is not accurate, of course, because the practice of inflation had begun earlier. However, the spectacular inflation which occurred in France after Law's central bank was nationalized gave Law the dubious honor of the title. As the son of a goldsmith turned banker, John Law was an interesting character in many ways. He was deeply devoted to the schools of Brotherhood mysticism, and these were behind many of the important social changes occurring in his time. Biographer Hans Wenthock, writing in his book Magnificent Moneymakers, describes Law as one of the last of the alchemist mystics, of the astrologers. Right. The last of the alchemist mystics, the guy that they called the father of inflation. Now do you understand what I've been telling you about what they're doing with these inflated gold and silver prices? It's fucking alchemy, you guys. If you've never listened to me about anything before, I'm begging you to listen to me on this. They did it once in the 80s with the Hunts. They're going to do it again now with gold and silver. Again, the guy who was deemed the father of inflation was described in the book Magnificent Moneymakers as, quote, one of the last great alchemist mystics of the astrologers who were dying out in the time of Voltaire. But in his pursuit of the stone of wisdom, he invented inflation. The guy who invented inflation was an alchemist. And these modern-day progeny of John Law are doing the same thing. They are getting you to take their worthless Federal Reserve notes, their worthless paper currency, exchange it for gold and silver, then they can come and take it all away. And they got all of us to engage in this alchemy form. It's genius. And this is why I've spent so much time researching the secret societies. I've finally figured it out. It's modern day alchemy. They're changing paper to gold right before our very eyes, and they're getting us to do it, because if they tried to do it, it would be illegal. But they cause inflation. They raise the price of the gold and silver. They get us to exchange it, trying to save our asses and have something safe in case the shit goes down. They tank it, buying it for pennies on the dollar, or make it illegal and send troops in Blackwater and go around and round it all up. They've done it once in this country. They'll do it again. That's an unbelievably shocking revelation. I just love it when we come across little nuggets like that just confirm what I've been saying, confirm what my research has shown. And that, to me, that is the biggest affirmation of that. My goodness, there it is right there. The father of inflation. I can't say this enough. The father of inflation was, quote, one of the last great alchemist mystics of the astrologers who were dying out in the time of Voltaire. But in his pursuit of the stone of wisdom, he invented inflation, intimately tying the mystery schools and the mystery religions and the bankers together in one nice little bow. And I haven't ever heard Alex Jones or any of these alleged truth tellers ever do that. Booyaka. Another interesting fact is that Law was a Scotsman with an obscure background. Just like the earlier counterpart in England, William Patterson, the Scottish link between Law and Patterson may be significant when we later review the evidence that Scotland was an important center of the secret but far-reaching brotherhood activity in Europe. Well, yeah, and also the fact that you have the formation of the International Association for the Advancement of Ethnology and Eugenics in Scotland as well. The head of the eugenics, I mean, this ties in wholly with this whole custodial plan of eugenics. That's why all these CMP types have always been related to that group, but yet, people who talk about eugenics never bring that up. This is why. Because it pins it back to these custodial priest class motherfuckers. The Scottish link between Law and Patterson, Law had played upon France's justifiable paranoia of England in order to convince the French government to establish a central bank identical to that of Britain. The warfare, which had earlier been instigated by William III, was causing a serious drain on the French treasury. Law's proposal seemed an attractive solution, and so it was finally adopted. At first, the new French currency issued under Law's plan appeared to revitalize the French economy. This happened because the banknotes could be redeemed for coins in which the people had faith. After the Bank of France became nationalized, however, it issued a severe overabundance of notes, not just a careful and gradual increase. People quickly realized that there was far more paper notes in circulation than there were coins to back them up. The result was a shattering of popular confidence in the notes and a consequent upheaval in the French economy. The Glorious Revolution of 1688 did not only give us the Bank of England, which is still Great Britain's central bank today, it also gave us England's current royal family, the House of Windsor. Imagine that. The House of Windsor is directly descended from the royal family of German Hanover, which had intimate ties to the House of Orange and to other German principalities in the treacherous marry and overthrow clique. After William III of Orange in England died, his sister Anne was seated on the British throne. By prior arrangement, upon Anne's death, the British throne was relinquished by the Orange family to the rulers of the German state of Hanover, who had also had earlier married into the British Stuart family. Again, don't forget, Phyllis Schlafly is a member of the Stuart bloodline and Bruce bloodline. This is very important to understand when you look at how big of a figurehead she is in the Republican right wing, the Council for National Policy. She's also a Dame of Malta. It's the Knights of Malta for females. She is a Dame of Malta. And this is why. She's one of the bloodlines. This is why, it explains why when I got footage of her in 2008 at that meeting, that she, everyone in the room stood up like she was the goddamn Queen of England. It was bizarre. Well, see, now this makes total sense, folks. This is who you're dealing with. Fabian socialists that came out of Britain. This is why. They've started every group of the left and right, and they get us believing in this left-right paradigm of divineness, but it's all the same tentacles of these custodial bastards. By prior arrangement upon Anne's death, the British throne was relinquished by the Orange family to the rulers of the German state of Hanover, who had earlier married into the British Stuart family. Hanover's first elector, Duke Ernest Augustus, had married a granddaughter of England's King James I, as was the true House of Orange. The rules were changed to suit the victors. The first Hanoverian king to take the British throne was George Louis, who became George I of England. George I could not speak English, and he viewed England as a temporary possession. He continued to devote most of his attention and care to his German homeland. As generations of Hanoverians ascended to the British throne, they became permanently entrenched in British society. The Hanoverians provided England with all of its monarchs through 1901, and Hanoverian descendants from Queen Victoria's side have furnished the rest all the way up until today. During all of that time, the dynasty continued to maintain strong ties to other German noble families. During the first century and half of the Hanoverian rule in England, for example, the British Hanoverian kings married only the daughters of other German royal families. Not surprisingly, there was widespread opposition in England to the Hanoverians after they took over. Many Englishmen understandably felt that German monarchs had no business reigning over British subjects. Anti-Hanoverian factions arose seeking to put the Stuarts back on the throne of England. Because of this, the Hanoverians decided not to allow a large standing army of native Britons, fearing that they might stage a coup. Instead, whenever England required a large number of troops, the Hanoverians used money from the British treasury to rent mercenaries from their German friends and from their own German Principality of Hanover, all at a most handsome fee. The greatest number of mercenaries were provided by the royal family of Hesse, which had close and friendly ties to the German House of Hanover. A curious aspect of the mercenary arrangement is that some important members of these German families, especially from Hesse, later emerged as leaders of a new type of Freemasonry, which had been created to topple the Hanoverians from the English throne. Before we study this remarkable situation, we should look to see what was happening with Freemasonry at that time. Major changes were unfolding that were about to make Freemasonry the single largest branch of the Brotherhood network. So that's the end of chapter 23. Chapter 24, Night's New Dawn, is the next chapter. And what time is it here? We got time. We're going to take a break, come back, and we'll get into chapter 24 for you tonight. Night's New Dawn, K-N-I-G-H-T-S, Night's New Dawn. We'll get into that on the other side of the break here, folks. This is the Global Reality right here on the Global Reality Radio Network. I'm your host, Josh Reeves. Stay with us.
Women are stupid and I don't respect them. That's right, I just have sex with them. Show me your genitals. Your genitals. What? Show me your genitals. Genitalia. Show me your genitals. Your genitals. What? Show me your genitals. Genitalia. You're talking to me about stuff. Why? I'd rather see your titties. Now you're talking about other stuff. Why? I'd much rather see your titties. I can't have sex with your personality, and I can't put my penis in your college degree, and I can't...
A tract stating that the Hanoverians were the only legitimate sovereigns of England under the laws of nature. On November 5th, 1737, another 5th of November there, He conferred the first 2 Masonic degrees on Frederick, Prince of Wales, a Hanoverian. During the ensuing generations, members of the Hanoverian royal family even became Grand Masters. The English Grand Lodge was decidedly pro-Hanoverian, and its prescription against political controversy really amounted to a support of the Hanoverian status quo. In light of the Machiavellian nature of the Brotherhood activity, if we were to view the Mother Grand Lodge as a Brotherhood faction designed to keep alive a controversial political cause, i.e. Hanoverian rule in Britain, we would expect the Brotherhood network to be the source of a faction supporting the opposition. That is precisely what happened. See, that makes sense. That makes total sense. Because it was the Stuarts, the Hanoverians, the Stuarts, they were trying to keep in power, and they were the custodial bloodlines that went back to the custodians, and it's just amazing to understand that Phyllis Schlafly came out of that bloodline. God, it just all makes so much sense now. It all makes so much sense who it is that we're really dealing with and why there has been this controlled opposition network of the truth movement set up with Alex Jones as his figurehead. He is the counterintelligence mouthpiece of the custodial races. That's all there is to it. Period. End of story. Put a period on it. It's over. Shortly after the founding of the Mother Grand Lodge, another system of Freemasonry was launched that directly opposed the Hanoverians. When James II was unseated by the Glorious Revolution of 1688, he fled to England. His followers promptly formed organizations to help him recover the British throne. The most effective and militant group was the Jacobite organization, headquartered in Scotland and Catholic Ireland. The Jacobites were able to rally widespread support for the Stuarts. They staged many uprisings and military campaigns against the Hanoverians, although they were ultimately unsuccessful in recrowning the Stuarts. When the unsuccessful James II died in 1701, his son, the self-proclaimed James III, continued the family struggle to reign the British throne. A new branch of Freemasonry was created to assist him. That branch was patterned after the old Knights Templar. The man who reportedly founded Knights Templar Freemasonry was one of James III's loyal supporters, Michael Ramsay. Ramsay was a Scottish mystic who had been hired by James III to tutor James's 2 sons in France. Ramsay's goal was to reestablish the disgraced Templar Knights in Europe. To accomplish this, Ramsay adopted the same approach used by the Mother Grand Lodge system of London. The resurrected Knights Templars were to be a secret, mystical, fraternal society open to men of varied occupations. The old knightly titles, uniforms, and tools of the trade were to be used for symbolic, fraternal, and ritual purposes within a Masonic context. In keeping with these aims, Ramsay dubbed himself the Chevalier of Ramsay, the Knight of Ramsay. Ramsay did not work alone. He was assisted by other Stuart supporters. Among them was the English aristocrat Charles Radcliffe. Radcliffe was a zealous Jacobite who had been arrested with his brother, the Earl of Derwentwater, for their actions in connection with the failed rebellion of 1715 to place James III on the British throne. Both brothers were sentenced to death. The Earl was beheaded, but Radcliffe escaped to France. In France, Radcliffe assumed the title of Earl of Derwentwater. He presided over a meeting in 1725 to organize a new Masonic lodge based on the Templar format being revealed by Ramsay. The Derwentwater Lodge was instrumental in getting the new Templar system of Freemasonry going in Europe. Derwentwater claimed that the authority to establish his lodge came from the Kilwinning Lodge of Scotland, Scotland's oldest and most famous lodge. Templar Freemasonry is therefore often called Scottish Freemasonry because of its reputed Scottish origin. Ramsay's Scottish Masonry attracted many members by claiming that the Templar Knights had actually secretly created the Mother Grand Lodge system. According to Ramsay, the Knights Templar had rediscovered the lost teachings of Freemasonry centuries earlier in the Holy Land during the Crusades. They brought the teachings back to Europe, and after their disgrace and banishment, secretly kept the teachings alive for hundreds of years in France, England, and Scotland. After centuries of living in the shadows, The Templars cautiously reemerged by releasing only the blue degrees through the vehicle of the Mother Grand Lodge. Ramsay claimed that the 3 blue degrees were issued only to test the loyalty of Freemasons. Once a Freemason proved his loyalty by reaching the 3rd degree, he was entitled to advance to the true degrees, the 4th, 5th, and higher degrees released by Ramsay. Ramsay stated that he was authorized to release the higher degrees by a secret Templar headquarters in Scotland. According to his story, the Scottish Templars were secretly working through the lodge at Kilwinning. To effect their pro-Stuart political aims, the Scottish lodges changed the biblical symbolism of the 3rd blue degree into political symbolism to represent the House of Stuart. Ramsay's higher degrees contained additional symbolism revealing why Freemasons had a duty to help the Stuarts regain the throne of England. Because of this, many people viewed Scottish Freemasonry as a clever attempt to lure Freemasons away from the Mother Grand Lodge system, which supported the Hanoverian monarchy, and to turn the new converts into pro-Stuart Masons. The Stuarts themselves joined Ramsay's organization. James III adopted the Templar title, Chevalier St. George, and his son Charles Edward was initiated into the Order of Knights Templar on September 24, 1745, the same year in which he led a major Jacobite invasion of Scotland. 2 years later, on April 15, 1747, Charles Edward established a Masonic Scottish Jacobite chapter in the French city of Arras. Charles Edward later denied ever having been a Freemason in order to squelch damaging rumors that Scottish Masonry was nothing more than a front for the Stuart cause, which it largely was. God, that makes so much sense. That's where the Stuarts came of. That's where the bloodlines, they came out of Scotland. That's why the IAAE is based in Scotland. That's why Jones never talks about it. That's why Schlafly was on his show defending the CMP. My God, folks, do you see how deep this is now? This is why people have